Evening on Mount Shasta does not arrive quickly. It drifts in like someone who showed up early to a quiet gathering and is trying very hard not to make eye contact. The last strands of daylight stretch across the snow in long, pale sweeps of color, giving everything a soft glow. Nothing sparkles here. It simply rests. The mountain accepts the fading light the way an old friend accepts a familiar greeting. No rush, no ceremony. Just a calm understanding that another night is beginning and daylight has done its job. The tall pines stand quietly in the cooling air. They do not sway or whisper. They simply breathe in a way that is so slow it would make a meditation instructor feel insecure. If you pay attention, you can almost hear the quiet weight of the forest leaning into itself. Even the wind seems careful. It moves around the branches like someone tiptoeing through a room they are not sure they are allowed to be in. The ground beneath your feet is made of ancient volcanic earth, dry, dark, slightly cracked. It holds the memory of fire even though it feels cold now. When you step on it, there is no loud crunch. The earth just absorbs the sound, acknowledging your presence with the same polite patience a librarian uses when someone whispers too loudly. If mountains could raise an eyebrow, Shasta would probably be doing it now. Not irritated, just amused by how tiny humans look compared to everything around them. Twilight stretches time in a strange way. The air thins and cools, not sharply, not aggressively, more like a deep breath that forgot to finish the exhale. The sounds of the world loosen and drift. A voice spoken here feels almost too sharp against the softness of the landscape. People naturally lower their tone as if the mountain has gently suggested that noise is optional tonight. Silence becomes a kind of etiquette. This is the moment when light fades enough for shadows to lengthen. Trees begin to merge into deeper outlines. The snow at the peak stops glowing and settles into a calm shade of blue. Night does not fall here. It settles, slowly, carefully, like a blanket being pulled up, 1 inch at a time. If you remain still long enough, you might begin to notice small details. A tiny crack in a cooling rock. The soft rustle of an animal finding a more comfortable spot to sleep. The brief flutter of wings. None of these things disturb the quiet, they simply add texture to it. The mountain at night is not empty, it is simply minimalistic. Like a master decorator with a strong belief in empty space and natural lighting. Mount Shasta has collected countless stories over the years. Not because it asked for them, but because quiet places tend to gather whispers. People stand here and feel something. A shift in the air. A calm that settles behind the ribs. A sense of being watched by something incredibly patient and absolutely uninterested in hurrying them. Some say it is the altitude. Others say it is imagination. A few just shrug and say, "It is Shasta, what did you expect?" We are not here to prove anything. We are not explorers tonight. No detectives, no adventurers with notebooks. Just simple visitors standing in front of a mountain that has existed long before us and will continue long after. Whatever stories belong to the people who came before us can stay stories. Whatever truths exist beneath the snow can stay where they are. Tonight is only about letting the mountain guide the pace, slowly, quietly, without asking anything in return. The landscape feels wide and open, yet strangely personal. The trees rise like pillars that have watched thousands of sunsets. The sky deepens into a velvet blue, not dark enough to be night, yet not bright enough to hold the day. In that in-between hour, the mountain seems to shift from geography to presence. not mystical or enchanted, just present, solid, patient, a giant that has mastered the art of standing still. Cold air begins to settle around you, not the kind that bites, the gentle kind that taps you politely on the shoulder and reminds you to zip your jacket. The mountain is considerate like that. It does not want to freeze you. It only wants you to notice it and maybe breathe a little slower. The top of the summit still holds on to the last bit of gold from the sun. For a moment, it glows like a lantern someone forgot to turn off. Then it fades into the deepening blue. The world softens, shapes blur, shadows melt into each other. The mountain becomes a silhouette with a long memory. It is here, in this exact moment, that the gentle humor of the mountain reveals itself. If you squint at the snowy slopes, they look like a giant pillow someone forgot to fluff. The trees resemble quiet spectators waiting for someone to start a performance that never actually takes place. Even the small patches of ice reflect the last light of the sky, with the low-effort enthusiasm of a cat who has been woken from a nap. Nothing tries too hard here. Nothing needs to. Stars begin to appear. At first only one or two, the shy ones, then more. They spread across the sky like tiny lanterns, waking up for the night shift. The snow reflects them faintly, enough to make the ground seem like it is glowing from a memory rather than a source. If you listen carefully, you may sense the mountain breathing. Not literally, because that would be a geological emergency. It feels more like the slow adjustment of a landscape preparing for night. The wind changes direction. The air cools more sharply. The forest settles. None of it happens suddenly. It is all gradual, smooth, unrushed. The volcanic layers beneath the ground hold a subtle warmth, not enough to feel on the surface, but enough to create a quiet hum deep inside the earth. A geologist could explain it in detail, something involving basalt, cooling rates, thermal shifts, but standing here, it only feels like the earth is rearranging itself for sleep. Nothing mystical, no hidden messages, just geology behaving like geology. And that is where the mountain's humor shows up again. Humans love dramatic explanations for things that are already quietly beautiful. Strange lights in the sky, unusual clouds, odd gusts of wind, all easily explained by weather, altitude, or the simple fact that mountains are tall and snow is reflective. If Shasta could speak, it might say, "Relax, I am not doing anything dramatic. I am literally just standing here." As night deepens, the mountain's silhouette sharpens against the sky. Snow becomes cooler in tone. The trees become darker. The world grows still, a stillness that holds no pressure, no demand, just space, wide, cool, calm. A space where your thoughts can finally slow down enough to match the rhythm of the land. Your breathing adjusts, your shoulders relax. You notice the quiet in your chest, the same quiet that wraps around the mountain. Nothing here is rushed. Nothing here is expected of you. You are simply standing in a place that has existed for millennia, and suddenly, for a moment, the world feels gentle. You are not here to figure out the mountain. You are not here to analyze it. You are here to share a moment with it. A moment shaped by cold air, fading light, and the soft hum of a land settling into night. Mount Shasta is not trying to impress you. It does not need to. It just stands there quietly, inviting you to slow down, to breathe, to rest, to let the night unfold, one calm second at a time. And in this quiet, you might finally feel it. Not a message, not a mystery. Just a subtle permission to let go. The mountain does not move, but the quiet around it does. And for tonight, that is more than enough. The deeper the evening settles around Mount Shasta, the more the mountain begins to reveal a quieter part of itself. Not the part that tourists photograph during the day. Not the dramatic, snow-bright summit that glows at sunrise. The real personality of the mountain shows itself when the sky dims and the noise of the world fades out. It is the personality of something ancient, something patient, something that has absolutely no intention of moving quickly for anyone. If you stand at the base of Mount Shasta for long enough, you start to feel the weight of time gathering around your ankles. The land here is not just old. It is ancient in the way library books are ancient, with layers of quiet stories pressed between the pages. Every ridge and slope holds a remnant of something that once existed long before anyone could name it. And beneath all of that, under the snow and rock and the chilled layers of earth, lies the geology that shaped the mountain in the first place. Mount Shasta is a stratovolcano. This means that it is made of many layers of hardened lava, ash, and volcanic debris. If mountains had resumes, Shasta's would look like a stack of geological accomplishments, each neatly arranged in chronological order. Hot lava layer here, ash deposit there, another eruption for dramatic effect, and then finally, a few centuries of cooling down because erupting all the time is exhausting. Even volcanoes need a break. The mountain has 4 main cones that merged over many thousands of years: Shastina, Hotlam, Misery Hill, and Sergeant's Ridge. Their names sound like characters in a strange, very polite rock band. Hotlam would probably be the dramatic one who always shows up late. Misery Hill would be the one who insists everything is fine even when it clearly is not. Shastina would handle the harmonies. And Sergeant's Ridge, with a name like that, would keep everyone organized. Together, these cones give the mountain its shape, not the smooth, elegant shape of a perfect cone that you would draw as a child. Shasta's shape is layered, stacked, rebuilt, cracked, and sculpted over time. It is a mountain that has lived through strong moments and quiet ones, violent eruptions and centuries of simple stillness. A mountain that remembers the heat of fire and the weight of ice. One of the last known eruptions of Mount Shasta is believed to have happened around the late 1700s. This is not recent in human time, but in volcanic time, it is practically yesterday. The mountain does not erupt often. It prefers a long, slow rhythm. The kind of rhythm that makes humans nervous, but makes geologists smile a little too much. If the mountain could talk, it would probably say something like, "Calm down. I am not planning anything. I am just thinking quietly." Beneath the snow, the mountain still breathes in its own geological way, not like a living creature, not with lungs or air, more like shifting layers of rock that slowly expand or contract as temperatures change. The process is subtle, completely natural, a slow rearrangement of heat and pressure deep within the earth. Nothing dramatic, nothing glowing, nothing cracking open in cinematic fashion, just the land adjusting itself the way a very old person might adjust a blanket over their knees. When the snow melts in spring, water drips into tiny fractures in the rock. The water seeps downward through layers of ash and hardened lava. It travels into cracks that formed centuries ago. Some of these cracks lead to deeper channels where heat from the earth warms the water, not hot enough to boil it, not even hot enough to cook an egg, just hot enough that you can imagine the mountain offering a gentle footbath to any passing stream that needs a bit of comfort. Scientists call these heated areas geothermal zones. To the mountain, they are simply old habits left over from its volcanic youth. The earth below Shasta still carries pockets of warmth. Remnants of fire linger deep inside the crust. The warmth does not rise in dramatic plumes. It stays where it is, quiet, contained, a reminder that even when a volcano sleeps, it does not turn into something else. It only rests. The soil near Mount Shasta is dark and rich, a result of hundreds of eruptions and thousands of years of erosion. Minerals from old lava flows have mixed with ash and organic matter. The ground feels firm under your feet, but soft enough to hold imprints of every step you take. It carries the memory of weather and seasons. Snow falls, snow melts, streams flow. Everything repeats in cycles that the mountain has perfected through repetition. If the mountain had a motto, it would probably be, "Consistency is key." The slopes are carved with old lava channels that have solidified into long, twisting paths. They look like the tracks of some enormous creature, something slow, steady, and very committed to walking in one direction for an extremely long time. In reality, these channels are simply the paths carved by molten rock long before anyone could write a story about it. When lava travels downhill, it does so with determination. It does not take breaks or detours. It picks a path and sticks to it. A very reliable coworker, if you think about it. Far below the surface, deep inside the crust, molten rock still exists. It sits quietly in chambers that have cooled significantly. It is not bubbling. It is not boiling. It is not plotting anything. It is simply there. Heat trapped in stone. A leftover from a time when the planet was much more energetic about things. In the present day, the magma beneath Shasta behaves with impeccable manners. It stays deep. It stays contained. It stays impressively calm for something so hot. If you hike high enough on the mountain, you begin to notice small vents along the ground. These vents allow heat to escape from deep below. The air above them feels slightly warmer. Only by a few degrees, but enough to notice if you hold your hand close to the surface. People sometimes mistake these vents for signs of mysterious forces. The truth is less dramatic and far more charming. It is simply warm air, saying hello as it rises through narrow openings created by cooling lava. Sometimes you may see steam drifting from snowfields during early winter, a thin, ghost-like plume swirling upward. It looks like something magical, but it is just snow landing on a warm rock. The snow melts instantly and the vapor lifts off like a sigh. If you pay attention, this melting sound resembles a tiny whisper, as if the mountain is trying to speak up but does not want to disturb anyone. A mountain with good manners is a rare thing. The layers of the mountain hold different colors depending on what formed them. Some layers are dark with basalt, others are pale from ash, others hold reddish tones from minerals that oxidized long ago. To the untrained eye, it looks like random stripes painted across the slopes. To geology, it is a timeline written in stone. Each color represents a different chapter in the mountain's long life, a life that began with violent energy but has now settled into a peaceful routine. Standing on Shasta and learning about its geology feels a bit like reading someone's diary, not in a sneaky or disrespectful way, but in a gentle way, where you discover that every page carries a small piece of the writer's life. Fire, ice, erosion, renewal. All of these things have shaped the mountain. All of them have left traces, and none of them happen quickly. Not one element here is in a hurry. The mountain is a master of long-term thinking. If you touch one of the cooled lava rocks, it feels rough and solid. But if you look closely, you can see tiny bubbles inside, remnants of gases trapped as the molten rock cooled. These tiny pockets of air have been sitting inside the rock for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, waiting, doing absolutely nothing. If rocks could laugh, these bubbles would probably giggle at how seriously humans take everything. During summer, when the snow melts from the lower slopes, the mountain reveals long, winding paths of old debris, pebbles, broken stone, bits of volcanic glass, all of it carried and rearranged by time. None of it looks dramatic, but each piece has a long story. A story of fire transformed into solid form, a story of pressure turned into shape. Geology is patient, it is slow, it does not expect applause, it simply continues, layer by layer, century by century, shaping a mountain that stands silently in the cool evening air. While humans sprint through days and count minutes, the mountain counts winters. It measures time in cycles of snowpack and melting streams, in the slow rise of warm air from the earth, in the distant rumble of tectonic plates shifting miles beneath the surface. When night finally claims the sky, the geological details fade from sight, but not from presence. Beneath the snow, beneath the rock, beneath the cold air settling across the slopes, the mountain continues its silent work, cooling, shifting, settling, resting, preparing for another cycle of seasons. The mountain is always doing something, just not at a speed humans can see. Mount Shasta is a reminder that the world is built on slow rhythms, not fast ones, that the earth creates its most enduring shapes through patience, not speed, and that even the most massive forces in nature can eventually settle into gentle silence. Geology does not hurry. Mount Shasta does not hurry. And tonight, standing in its shadow, you do not need to hurry either. You are allowed to breathe slowly. You are allowed to rest. The mountain will stay right where it is, and beneath the snow, the earth continues its quiet, ancient work, shaping the land with a calmness so deep that even time relaxes for a moment. When night begins to settle along the lower edges of Mount Shasta, the air feels as though it carries something older than sound. It is not a voice and not a whisper. It is more like the faint memory of footsteps that once crossed the land long before trails were carved and long before the mountain gained a name that people now write on maps. The stories of the Shasta region do not rise up loudly. They drift in the same way mist drifts across a field, soft, almost shy, as if they want to be heard only by those who are patient enough to stand still. The people who once lived around this mountain long before anyone called it a national landmark were observant. They paid attention to things that modern visitors often overlook: the shape of shadows, the sound of cold wind sliding between branches, the movement of animals long before sunrise. To them, the mountain was not a mystery to be solved, but a presence to be noticed. That presence shaped their stories in ways that feel quiet and grounded. Nothing dramatic, nothing supernatural. Just the way humans have always explained the world around them, with images that feel familiar and comforting. Imagine sitting near the base of Mount Shasta thousands of years ago. The night would have been darker than any modern city could ever dream of. No headlights, no cell phone screens, no electric glow creeping across the edges of the land. Only the soft shine of stars and the cold brightness of snow that reflects just enough of the sky to look like a dim lantern. In that kind of darkness, people start listening differently. Every crack in a branch sounds sharper. Every shift in wind feels like a message. Not a coded message from somewhere else, just a reminder that nature is alive and very good at playing with sound. The Shasta people lived in villages connected to the rhythm of the mountain. Their stories grew from the land the same way pine trees grow from volcanic soil, slowly, rooted deeply. Some stories describe the mountain as a place where the earth touched the sky, not in a mythical sense, but literally. The peak rises so high that on certain days, clouds cling to it like fabric hanging on a hook. If you stand on the upper slopes and look out across the world, you feel close enough to the sky to understand why people used such poetic descriptions. It is simply easier to say, the mountain touches the sky, than to give a detailed explanation involving altitude and atmospheric layers. The Modoc people living to the northeast also held stories shaped by the land. They were skilled observers of weather and terrain. They noticed how the mountain cast long shadows that stretched across valleys like giant arms, reaching to pull the daylight closer. On winter mornings, when frost covered every surface, the mountain's quiet silhouette looked like it was wearing a glittering coat of ice. If modern hikers tried to describe this sight, they might use words like magical or cinematic. The Modoc did not need such words. They simply told stories about the mountain being a place where cold and light liked to play together. Farther to the west lived the Karuk people. Their stories often came from the river valleys and forested slopes. They paid close attention to how the mountain seemed to change colors throughout the day. Soft pink at dawn, sharp white at noon, deep blue at dusk. Some stories describe the mountain as a kind of marker of direction, something steady, something that always stayed in view, even when weather shifted. If you asked the mountain why it was so good at guiding people, it might respond with something like, "I am tall. This is not complicated." The Wintu people lived south of the mountain. They were known for their understanding of plant life and water. Streams flowing from Mount Shasta played a large role in their daily life. They described these waters as ancient travelers, moving down the slopes with quiet determination. When snow melted each spring, the water carried with it the memory of winter. If you closed your eyes and listened to the streams, they sounded like soft conversations between cold air and warm sun. Nothing mystical, just the way moving water always sounds like it has something to say. The stories from all these groups were not meant to instruct anyone about belief or explain the universe. They were simply reflections of how people saw the land and how they made sense of the patterns around them. Stories helped them remember important details, where the safest paths were, how animals behaved during certain seasons, why certain slopes were stable and others were not. In a way, their stories were early versions of weather reports and geological notes, just a lot more poetic. For example, there is a story that describes how the northern winds travel down the mountain at night. In modern science, this would be explained with cold air density and slope temperature differences. But long ago, people simply said the winds like to slide down gently, as if the mountain were offering them a smooth path. Honestly, this explanation feels more polite and more accurate to the experience itself. Mountain winds do not rush. They glide. If wind had manners, Mount Shasta's wind would probably send thank you notes for the ease of travel. Many of the stories around the mountain describe movement, clouds drifting low and clinging to the tree line, animals crossing snowfields in patterns that look like lines drawn by a careful hand, shadows expanding and shrinking as the sun moves across the sky. To people who lived here for generations, these movements created meaning, not in a symbolic or spiritual way, just in an observational way. When people live in close connection to land, they start to give personality to the things they see every day. It helps them remember. It helps them pay attention. For instance, there are quiet descriptions of how the mountain sometimes hides its peak behind thick fog, not out of secrecy, but out of mood, as if the mountain occasionally decides that visibility is optional. Modern hikers often complain about this fog because it appears out of nowhere. One moment you can see every detail of the slope. The next moment, everything is swallowed by a cloud so thick you could wave your hand in front of your face and miss it. The older stories simply described the fog as a traveler who occasionally forgets where it set its blanket down. Less scientific, perhaps, but certainly more endearing. People also shared stories about listening to the mountain at night. If you sit quietly long enough, you may hear the sound of rocks shifting as the temperature drops. It is not loud. It is not alarming. It is simply the sound of the mountain adjusting itself for sleep. Long ago, people said the mountain liked to settle in for the night by stretching its layers, the same way a person might stretch their back before lying down. If mountains could stretch, Shasta would probably do it very slowly and with great dignity. There were also stories about how animals seemed to understand the mountain better than humans did. Deer knew which slopes held the softest snow. Birds knew where the best thermal currents rose from the ground. Even small animals knew which crevices stayed warm during winter freezes. People watched these animals and created gentle stories about their relationship to the land. Not myths, not legends, just observations turned into simple narratives to help children learn about nature. A parent might say, "Watch where the birds fly in winter. They always know which path is safest." It is practical advice told in a more memorable way. Some stories describe the way the moonlight touched the mountain, how the summit looked like silver metal under a full moon, how the shadows stretched long across the ground, as if the mountain were painting the land. Today, photographers wait hours to capture these same moments. Long exposure shots, tripods, wide-angle lenses, a lot of quiet muttering about the cold. But long ago, people simply watched and said, "The mountain is bright tonight." No hashtags, no complicated camera settings. Just a moment observed and then kept inside the memory. The humorous part of these old stories is how practical they actually are. For example, there are tales that say the mountain sometimes shows long streaks of blowing snow from the summit. People used these streaks to predict weather changes. If the snow plume pointed far to the east, strong winds were coming. If it hovered close to the peak, storms might stay away. Imagine explaining this to a child. Instead of discussing wind patterns and pressure systems, you simply say, "The mountain is brushing its hair." Strangely enough, it works as a weather forecast. There are no dramatic heroes in these stories. No battles, no cosmic events. Just people observing the mountain over centuries and turning their observations into gentle tales that help them remember important information. In a way, these stories feel like early versions of instruction manuals, except much more poetic and without the confusing diagrams. The mountain shaped the stories, and the stories helped shape how people related to the mountain. Not in a worshipful way, not in a fearful way, simply in a respectful an observational way. When a landscape is both beautiful and potentially dangerous, it makes sense that people develop a language for describing its moods. Snow that falls too fast, winds that shift suddenly, shadows that hide sudden drops. Stories allow people to speak about these things in a calm way without alarming anyone. Today, when visitors hike through the forest around Mount Shasta, they move through the same landscapes where these stories were born. They step over the same volcanic soil. They listen to the same wind. They watch clouds swirl around the peak, the same way ancient observers did. The mountain has not changed its rhythms. Only the world around it has become noisier. If you pause during your hike, you might feel the stories lingering in the air. Not in a mystical sense, just in the way landscapes hold memories of the people who walked them. Stories become part of the land even when no one is telling them out loud. They linger in the patterns of deer tracks, in the curve of rivers, in the quiet sway of pine branches. Mount Shasta does not tell these stories. It simply allows them to rest along its slopes. And at night, when everything becomes still, those stories feel like part of the mountain's quiet breathing. Soft, unhurried, present. In this way, the mountain becomes more than rock and snow. It becomes a place where human memory and natural rhythm meet gently in the dark. A place where stories are held without being spoken, and a place where anyone who stands still long enough can feel a connection to something older than the modern world. Not mystical, not spiritual, just timeless. And tonight, as you listen to the quiet around you, the stories settle in the air like mist that has no destination. They are simply here, resting with the mountain, resting with you. And if you close your eyes, you may feel the softness of time itself sitting beside you, calm, patient, and perfectly content to say nothing at all. Night moves slowly across Mount Shasta, and by the time the stars begin to gather in the sky, the mountain feels like it has shifted into an even quieter version of itself. The cold air presses lightly against the pine needles. The snow reflects the faint glow of starlight. The landscape grows still, as though time has decided to take a short break. In this calm, another layer of stories begins to settle. Not the grounded, earth-woven stories of the early people who lived here, and not the scientific, neatly organized geology that explains how the mountain was built. These stories drift from a different direction. They float, they hover, they behave like guests who enter a room quietly and hope no one notices the exact moment they appeared. These are the stories of Lemuria. They do not belong to the mountain in any official sense. They are not carved into stone or recorded in ancient documents. They simply exist as part of the modern imagination, sometimes playful, sometimes mysterious, always surrounded by a kind of soft curiosity that makes them perfect for late-night conversation or for a long, slow walk under the stars. To understand how these stories came to rest here, we need to travel back to the late 1800s, when a young man named Frederick Spencer Oliver wrote a book called A Dweller on Two Planets. The title alone feels like it belongs to a shelf, labeled Dramatic Adventures for the Extremely Curious. The book introduced the idea of an ancient civilization named Lemuria, a place supposedly filled with advanced knowledge, calm people, bright clothing, and long histories that no one could verify but everyone loved to talk about. It is the literary equivalent of hearing a rumor at a cafe and saying, "I cannot confirm any of this, but I will absolutely listen to every detail." In Oliver's book, he described the Lemurians as beings who somehow managed to survive the end of their mysterious continent and quietly relocated to a new home inside Mount Shasta. How they achieved this relocation is never made clear. The book simply suggests that they did it, the way some stories simply declare that a character learned to fly without bothering to explain the physics. Apparently, when a story wants to get to the interesting parts, it does not waste time. Over the years, the idea of Lemurians living within Mount Shasta became a kind of cultural snowball. It rolled downhill, collected ideas from various people, gathered new embellishments, and became larger each time someone retold it. Some said the Lemurians built an entire underground city called Telos. Others said they occasionally walked the lower slopes of the mountain in long, pale robes that caught the moonlight. A few people claimed to see glowing lights drifting through the trees near dusk. These lights, depending on who you asked, were either advanced Lemurian lanterns or simply reflections bouncing off pockets of ice. Reality rarely gets invited to these conversations. What makes these stories surprisingly charming is not whether they are real. It is how gently they sit on the imagination. They never demand belief. They never insist on being taken seriously. They exist the way thin mist exists on a cold morning. Quiet, soft, unhurried. If you decide to walk through them, they drift aside politely. The most commonly mentioned feature in the Lemurian stories is the city of Telos. According to the tales, Telos is a vast subterranean world with tall halls, quiet chambers, and glowing crystals that light entire rooms. People who enjoy retelling the story describe the city with great enthusiasm. They paint images of polished floors and serene pathways. They talk about the soft lighting that seems to come from nowhere. They describe a perfectly peaceful society made up of gentle people who always manage to be calm, well-groomed, and inexplicably knowledgeable about everything. If you think about it, Telos sounds like a vacation resort, designed by someone who desperately wanted to mix quiet luxury with complete absence of stress. Then again, the stories never specify how the Lemurians pay rent down there, how they deal with recycling, or how they keep their laundry so impeccably white in an underground environment. These are small details that storytellers tend to ignore, possibly because laundry is rarely an exciting topic unless someone else is doing it. Regardless of the gaps in logic, the idea of Telos has fascinated people for over a century. It is not because there is evidence, there is not. It is because stories like this tap into something that humans do very well. We give personality to places. When a mountain is tall, silent, and constantly surrounded by fog, it becomes the perfect canvas for imagination. Some people imagine ancient beings living under it. Others imagine secret tunnels filled with glowing stones. A few imagine nothing at all and simply enjoy the walk. Mount Shasta does not encourage or discourage these interpretations. The mountain simply stands there with its snow and its shadows and its very quiet slopes. If the mountain could speak, it might say something like, "People tell many stories about me. I am not responsible for any of them. Please enjoy the view." Most versions of the Lemurian story describe the beings as exceptionally tall and peaceful. Their clothing is always described in suspiciously clean terms: white, flowing, or shimmering. Apparently, the mountain has access to a very efficient dry cleaning service. They walk silently. Their footsteps do not disturb snow or soil. Their expressions remain calm in all circumstances. Even modern hikers with expensive boots cannot manage silence that impressive. A single pebble can turn the quietest person into a walking percussion ensemble. People who claim to have seen glowing lights on Shasta often talk about soft hues of blue or pale green drifting through the trees. These sightings tend to occur during misty evenings or shortly after sunset, when the air is full of moisture and the snow reflects the smallest bit of light. The mountain has many natural ways of creating optical illusions: ice crystals catching the moon, light bouncing off patches of snow, tiny insects reflecting headlamp beams. Even distant campers can accidentally create a light show without knowing it. Humans tend to underestimate how easily the night sky can play tricks on tired eyes. But instead of explaining these sightings with science, some people prefer the more imaginative explanation that a Lemurian lantern slipped through a crack in a hidden doorway. This version of the story is always more fun to tell around a campfire, especially when the night is windless and the mountain feels unusually watchful. The important thing to remember is that these stories do not ask for you to accept them as fact. They simply ask you to enjoy the thought of them. If you walk through the forest at dusk, the atmosphere can make everything feel a little more mysterious. The tall pines rise like pillars in a silent hall. The snow muffles footsteps. The sky darkens in slow gradients of blue. If there were ever a place where a strange story could settle comfortably without causing alarm, it would be here. Sometimes fog rolls in from the lower slopes and gathers around the treetops. It moves so slowly that it almost looks intentional, as if the fog is rehearsing for a performance and wants to get its timing exactly right. Fog on Mount Shasta behaves with a kind of slow confidence that suggests it is not worried about human schedules. It drifts when it wants to drift. It settles when it wants to settle. If it had eyelids, it would blink very slowly. In such a landscape, even the simplest movement can become suggestive. A flash of white from a patch of snow looks like a figure for half a second. A gust of wind brushing against branches sounds like breathing. A bird taking off from a treetop becomes a graceful silhouette that prompts someone to say, "What was that?" And someone nearby answers, "Probably nothing." But the possibly is enough to make the story exciting. Some visitors come to Mount Shasta looking specifically for traces of Lemuria. They bring cameras, they bring notebooks, they bring snacks large enough to survive the expedition in case they accidentally discover a hidden society and forget to go home. Most of them leave with beautiful photos, cold fingers, and no sightings at all. The mountain remains quiet. The snow remains where it always was. The only glowing things they see are their phone screens when they check the time. Yet, despite the lack of proof, the Lemurian stories continue to flourish. They travel through conversations. They appear in books. They slip into late-night documentaries with dramatically slow narration. They become part of the cultural landscape of Shasta, not because they have evidence, but because they offer a gentle escape into imagination. There is something soothing about imagining a peaceful society living quietly under a mountain, a place with warm lighting, soft hallways, and calm voices, a place without conflict or noise or deadlines or the constant pinging of notifications. It is a comforting thought, the kind of thought that makes hiking feel a little more magical, even if you know the trail leads nowhere except back to the parking lot. The mountain itself has no opinion about these ideas. It continues its geological routines. Snow falls, snow melts, rocks settle, water flows. The earth shifts slowly beneath the surface. If the mountain notices the stories people tell about it, it probably finds them mildly entertaining. 100 years from now, people will likely invent new stories. and the mountain will still be here, remaining neutral, remaining steady, remaining politely quiet. The charm of the Lemurian tales is that they do not require the mountain to do anything unusual. They simply use the mountain as a backdrop, a setting, a stage for gentle mystery. Mount Shasta is dramatic enough in size and shape that people naturally wonder what might be hidden behind its ridges or beneath its snow. When a place is this quiet and this beautiful, imagination tends to wander. If someone were to ask the mountain directly whether Lemurians live inside it, the mountain would probably respond with a very long silence. Not because it is withholding information, simply because mountains are extremely consistent with their communication style. For anyone walking the slopes of Shasta at night, the Lemurian stories add a layer of charm. Not fear, not excitement, just charm. The kind of charm that makes the forest feel like it is holding a secret that is pleasant rather than ominous. A secret that does not need to be solved. A secret that simply makes the night feel deeper. As you continue walking along the trail, the snow crunches softly under your feet. The trees lean inward, the stars appear in clusters, and somewhere in the distance a soft light flickers behind a patch of fog. Maybe it is a camper adjusting a lantern. Maybe it is moonlight slipping through ice, or maybe someone, somewhere, is telling the Lemurian story again, and the mountain is allowing it to drift into the night air. Here in the quiet of Shasta, stories do not live loudly. They rest. Just like the mountain, just like the night, just like the imagination that created them. And whether or not Lemurians ever existed, the whisper of their story remains. Soft, gentle, unhurried, perfectly suited for a night when the world feels heavy and all you want is a quiet tale to walk beside you. When the night deepens around Mount Shasta, the mountain shifts into a new kind of quiet, the kind of quiet that feels layered. The top layer is simple stillness, like a blanket pulled across the landscape. Beneath that is the soft hum of the forest settling, and somewhere deeper is a quiet that belongs only to mountains. A quiet formed by centuries of snow, wind, cooling rock, and the slow patience of time. In this atmosphere, small things become noticeable. A flicker of light, a shift of color, a sound that feels almost musical, none of it dramatic, all of it gentle, the kind of gentle that makes people wonder if the mountain is doing something unusual, when really it is just being itself. Some of the most talked about nighttime moments on Mount Shasta involve lights, not bright flashes that make people scream, more like drifting points of color that appear for a moment and then slide away. Pale blue, soft white, sometimes a faint green shimmer that looks like it is deciding whether it wants to exist. These lights have been mentioned in stories for decades. Hikers mention them. Campers mention them. People who stand too long in the cold and begin questioning their life choices mention them. The truth is that the mountain has many ways of creating natural light tricks. Snow can reflect the moon. Ice can catch starlight. Tiny crystals in the air can scatter brightness in unpredictable ways. Cold air bends light differently. Fog refracts it like a shy mirror. The landscape does not need any mysterious activity to look strange. It just needs the right combination of moisture, snow, and a slightly overactive imagination. One of the most common explanations for the drifting lights is something very simple. Ice. When snow freezes into thin, sharp crystals, it reflects light as if trying to audition for a job in a tiny natural disco. The crystals catch moonlight or the glow from distant headlamps and bounce it around. To someone standing in the dark, it looks like soft lights floating in the air. In reality, it is just frozen water showing off a bit. If the crystals could talk, they would probably say, "Look at me. I am reflecting light at a 90-degree angle. You are welcome." Another common cause is hikers. Humans love to underestimate how visible their gear becomes at night. Headlamps shine in every direction except the direction the wearer thinks they are aiming. Reflective strips on backpacks catch and scatter brightness in ways that make them look like tiny meteors zooming between the trees. And when hikers decide to adjust their gear while standing on a ridge, the light bounces so far across the snow that someone half a valley away might mistake it for something unusual. This is a common occurrence on Shasta. One person moves their headlamp. Another person miles away begins writing notes about mysterious activity. Then there is the humble airplane. The mountain sits close to several flight paths. At night, planes traveling at steady altitude blink their navigation lights in rhythmic patterns. Red, white, red, white. The lights pass high above the summit with complete indifference to the mountain below. But if a bit of fog drifts in, or if a patch of snow is angled just right, the blinking light reflects downward. The reflection creates the illusion of lights gliding along the slopes. Some hikers claim these lights move with purpose, that they glide too smoothly to be airplanes. But the truth is that airplanes are extremely committed to moving smoothly. It is one of their core job responsibilities. Some visitors occasionally report glowing shapes near the tree line. These sightings usually occur late at night when fog is present. Fog has a unique way of holding light without letting it escape. Shine a flashlight into fog, and it becomes a floating orb. Let moonlight fall onto fog, and it creates a halo around itself. Fog is the world's most subtle stage designer. It takes whatever light is available and stretches it into a floating shape, then decides how long it wants to keep the shape before letting it drift away. There are evenings when the air fills with what looks like drifting threads of white light. Some describe them as soft ribbons. Others say they resemble faint comets. Most of these lights come from tiny insects reflecting light from unexpected angles. Moths, for example, have a natural talent for catching beams from headlamps. A single flutter can create a streak of brightness that looks surprisingly dramatic. If moths could brag, they might mention that they have fooled more tired hikers than any other creature on the mountain. But of all the strange sightings on Shasta, the most visually striking ones are the lenticular clouds. These are clouds shaped like smooth, layered lenses. They form when moisture-filled air flows over the mountain and organizes itself into stacked layers. When the sun sets behind them, the clouds glow in soft shades of gold and violet. When the moon rises, the clouds turn white and reflective, floating above the peak like polished stones. To someone seeing them for the first time, they look perfectly shaped, almost too shaped, the kind of shaped that makes people say, "Surely nature did not do that on purpose." But nature absolutely did. Lenticular clouds are so well structured that people often assume they are solid. Some visitors have stared at them for several minutes before realizing they are watching water vapor and not a floating object. When hikers describe these clouds, they sometimes use dramatic language. They say the clouds hovered. They say the clouds glowed. They say the clouds seemed to follow them. Clouds do not follow people. Clouds follow the wind. But it is easy to see how someone might mix up the two. The most amusing part of these cloud stories is that they often end with someone saying, "And then it disappeared instantly." Of course it did. Clouds do that. Clouds love disappearing. It is practically their favorite hobby. Then there are the natural sounds that accompany these lights and shapes. During cold nights, the wind slides through narrow cracks in the rocks. When it moves at just the right speed, it produces a musical tone. Sometimes it sounds like a whistle, sometimes like a long flute note, sometimes like someone half-heartedly attempting to play a bamboo instrument. People who hear these tones occasionally describe them as voices, not because they are trying to invent something, but because the human brain is extremely talented at assigning meaning to sound, especially in the dark, especially when the night air is thin. These natural flute-like tones have an atmospheric quality. They drift through the trees, dip behind ridges, and then rise again. A person standing alone on a trail may suddenly hear a long single note traveling across the valley. The sound does not repeat. It does not build. It does not escalate. It simply moves gently, then fades into silence. If a mountain could hum a lullaby, this would be the closest thing to it. Another sound that sometimes causes confusion is the sliding of snow on rock. When a thin sheet of ice warms slightly and shifts, it makes a soft, scraping noise. The sound resembles someone dragging a long stick along the ground. Since the movement often happens at night when temperatures drop rapidly, hikers sometimes hear the noise before they see the slope. They pause, they listen, they wonder. Then they realize it is only snow, adjusting itself. Snow does that. It has an entire nighttime routine. There is also the phenomenon of cold air movement. When the temperature drops suddenly, dense air begins to flow downhill. The movement can be so strong that it creates the sensation of a breeze coming from behind, even when the rest of the forest is still. Hikers often interpret this breeze as something following them. But cold air does not follow people. It follows gravity. And gravity is very dedicated. In some areas around the mountain, the snow glows faintly in certain lighting, not because of energy or anything mysterious. The snow contains tiny particles of reflective minerals. When the moon is bright, these minerals catch the light and release it in small sparkles. The effect can look like faint trails of brightness stretching across the ground. If someone is walking with a dim headlamp, the snow may appear to shimmer in response to each step. It is beautiful. It is natural. And it makes people briefly look behind them to make sure they are not being accompanied by a glowing companion. One of the gentlest phenomena is the way the mountain creates reflections from distant light sources. A single cabin light can reflect on mist and appear hundreds of feet away in an entirely different direction. Car headlights traveling through forest roads can bounce their beams onto snowbanks. These reflections look like soft, floating orbs. People tend to describe them as moving with intelligence. In reality, they move with the precision of a car turning a corner. People who hike at night often experience a sense that the mountain is alive with subtle activity, not dramatic activity, just subtle. The kind of subtle that makes you think you saw something, then realize you're not entirely sure, then decide it was probably nothing, then immediately look again because maybe it was something after all. This is normal. Shasta is very good at creating tiny movements in the corner of your eye. Take tree branches, for example. When the wind shifts, even slightly, the branches move like slow gestures. If the moonlight catches them just right, they cast long shadows that stretch across the trail. These shadows look like soft figures walking. They are not. They are trees doing their nightly exercise routine. Then there is the effect that happens when a thin layer of frost melts and refreezes. The ice becomes slightly translucent. When your light hits it, the ice glows from within. This inner glow looks like something lit from beneath the surface. It is elegant, almost theatrical. If you took a picture of it and posted it online, someone would absolutely comment something dramatic. Meanwhile, the ice itself would say, "If it could speak, I am just reflecting light. Please calm down." The natural world on Mount Shasta is full of these gentle illusions. They make the mountain appear more active than it is. They inspire stories, conversations, and imaginative interpretations. None of it requires something extraordinary to be happening. Nature already has enough tricks to fill a book. And Mount Shasta, with its snow, fog, altitude, and open skies, happens to be an exceptional stage for those tricks. As the night deepens, the lights soften even further. A breeze moves across the slope. The last reflections fade. The flute-like tones disappear. The clouds drift into new shapes. Everything becomes calm again. A kind of calm that feels older than the world you woke up in. The mountain is still. The lights are gone. The sounds rest. And the only thing remaining is the slow breathing of the land itself. Whatever strange or gentle things you saw are simply part of night on Mount Shasta, part of its patience, part of its atmosphere. The mountain does not try to impress anyone. It does not perform. It simply exists with a quiet presence that makes ordinary things look slightly magical. Not because they are supernatural, but because the night here is soft enough to make even simple light feel like a story. The deeper the night settles over Mount Shasta, the more the mountain begins to feel like a landscape made of layers. Layers of cold air, layers of shadow, layers of time. And beneath all of that, hidden far from the glow of stars and the softness of the sky, lies another world. It is a world made not of stories or imagination, but of stone. A world carved by heat, shaped by ancient movement, and cooled by centuries of quiet endurance. If the surface of the mountain feels like a calm breath, then the underground feels like the long, slow exhale that follows. What exists beneath Mount Shasta is not a secret, at least not in the dramatic sense that people sometimes imagine. There are no hidden cities or glowing halls. What you find instead are tunnels, real tunnels, geological tunnels, some carved by cooling lava, others shaped by melting ice, all of them connected to the long memory of the mountain. These tunnels begin far below the snow line. They open in unexpected places, small cracks in basalt, wide mouths hidden behind boulders, narrow passages covered by ice that glitters when light hits it. If you shine a lamp into these openings, the light disappears quickly, swallowed by darkness that feels deep and patient. The darkness inside a lava tube does not look like ordinary darkness. It feels older, more settled, like it has been sitting there for several thousand years and is in no hurry to go anywhere. Lava tubes form when molten rock flows downhill in a thick river. The outer layer cools first, creating a hard shell. Inside that shell, the lava keeps moving, still glowing, still flowing, still trying to get somewhere. When the eruption ends and the lava drains out, it leaves behind an empty tunnel, a passageway made of stone, sometimes smooth, sometimes jagged, always shaped by heat that no longer exists. These tunnels are like old fireplaces that have not seen flame in centuries. They hold the memory of heat, long after the warmth has gone. Walking inside one of these lava tubes, even in daytime, feels like stepping into the mountain's past. The air becomes colder by several degrees, not the sharp cold that bites your skin, but the deep, layered cold that seems to come from the stone itself. The further you go, the more the temperature drops. Your breath becomes visible. The sound of your footsteps changes, turning into hollow echoes that bounce gently across the walls. It is surprisingly comforting, the kind of comfort that comes from knowing the mountain is simply being itself. Some people imagine lava tubes as dangerous places full of dramatic pits or sudden drops. And yes, some tunnels do have uneven floors or hidden corners, but many of them are surprisingly calm. They are long, cool hallways of basalt that twist slowly through the earth. If the mountain had an internal architecture style, it would be described as minimalist. No decorations, no furniture, just simple curves, long corridors, and the occasional boulder that looks like it decided to stop in the middle of the walkway hundreds of years ago and never left. There are ice tunnels too. These form when snow melts on the surface, seeps into cracks, and freezes again in long ribbons. Over time, this freezing and melting carves pockets in the ground. The tunnels become lined with translucent ice. The walls shine with soft reflections of your flashlight. When you move, the light breaks into thousands of tiny sparkles. It feels like walking through a hallway made of glass that forgot how to stay still. In some places, the ice forms delicate ridges that resemble frozen waves. They curl slightly at the edges, as if the cold air sculpted them with a gentle hand. If you touch them, they melt slightly under your warmth. Not enough to change the shape, just enough to remind you that ice, like everything else inside this mountain, has its own slow rhythm. The most surprising part of these underground tunnels is the silence. The silence inside a lava tube is different from the silence on the surface. On the surface, silence is made of wind, snow, and distant echoes. Underground, silence feels like a thick blanket. When you stand still, the only sound you hear is your own breathing, and maybe the faintest drip of water if you listen closely. Ah, yes. The water. Lava tubes love dripping water. It is one of their favorite hobbies. When snow melts above the ground, the water slips into narrow cracks and makes its way downward. Inside the tube, the water falls drop by drop. Each drop echoes in the empty space. The echo is gentle. It does not repeat sharply. It spreads like a soft ripple, then fades. If you close your eyes, it sounds like a small clock, ticking in a room without walls, a clock that has no intention of telling you the correct time. Some tubes contain piles of loose ash that crumble under your boots. This ash comes from ancient eruptions that coated the mountain long before anyone kept written records. The ash is dry and fine. It puffs upward when you step on it, then settles again in a soft sigh. The color varies from deep gray to pale brown. If you look closely, you might find tiny crystals inside it. Not valuable crystals, more like grains of volcanic glass. Glossy, sharp, very determined not to disappear. There are also long scratches on the walls of some tunnels. People sometimes mistake these marks for signs of something dramatic. They imagine claws, tools, mysterious activity. But the truth is much more patient. The scratches are caused by rocks being dragged by cooling lava or by the slow shifting of the earth. Nature leaves marks on itself all the time. Most of the time it is not trying to announce anything. It is just doing what nature does best, making slow adjustments without asking permission. One of the most intriguing features of these underground spaces is the occasional opening into a wider chamber. These chambers feel like rooms, not rooms built by someone with blueprints or decorative taste. Rooms built accidentally by nature. Their ceilings arch upward, their walls curve inward. The floor is often uneven. In some chambers, the air feels slightly warmer. In others, it feels cool and still. Standing silently in one of these natural rooms is like being inside the lungs of the mountain, not in a literal way, more in the sense that the room feels like a deep breath that has been held for thousands of years. When light from the entrance spills into the chamber, it creates long, soft shadows that stretch across the rock. The shadows look like slow-moving shapes. They shift when you move your lamp. They change direction when the angle changes. It is easy to imagine the chamber being alive. Not alive in a biological sense. Alive in the sense that stone has a quiet personality. If stone had thoughts, they would probably unfold very slowly. There are moments underground when the air becomes completely still. No wind, no movement, no sound. It feels like the mountain has paused to listen. Not to you, not to anything, just to itself. Mountains do that. They listen to their own weight, their own pressure, their own internal shifts. This listening does not produce dramatic activity. It produces calm. Occasionally, the tunnel floor slopes downward into darkness so complete that it looks almost solid. If you shine a light downward, the beam seems to get swallowed. The darkness does not fight the light. It just accepts it with impressive politeness. Then it gives back only a faint outline of the floor. This is not because the darkness is special. It is because basalt absorbs light extremely well. Basalt is the master of understatement. The deeper you go, the more you notice small details, like thin cracks that run along the ceiling. They branch like delicate threads. Some cracks sparkle because moisture has seeped into them and frozen. These tiny ice crystals catch light beautifully. They look like constellations drawn on stone. If someone took a photograph, it would look like the ceiling had been decorated by a minimalist artist with a very steady hand. There are also pockets of trapped air in some walls. These pockets were formed when lava cooled around bubbles. The bubbles burst long ago, leaving empty cavities. The cavities make soft pops when tapped gently. Not loud pops, just small, respectful ones. Like the rock is acknowledging your curiosity but does not want to make a big deal about it. Every now and then you might come across a tunnel that dips slightly and leads to a colder section. Here the air smells faintly metallic. Not unpleasant, just different. This smell comes from minerals that have slowly dissolved in moisture. The cold temperature preserves the scent. You might also notice frost on the floor. Thin sheets of frost that crunch lightly when stepped on. Frost has a wonderful talent for making even quiet footsteps sound important. As you move further inside, the walls shift from smooth stone to layered ridges. These ridges tell the story of different eruptions. Some layers are thick, others are thin, some are darker, others lighter. Each layer represents a moment when molten rock moved through the tube, paused, cooled slightly, then continued its journey. Reading these layers is like reading a very slow diary. If the mountain wrote entries, they would look like this. Another flow today. Cooling faster than expected. Found a new crack in the ceiling. We'll investigate later. The most remarkable thing about exploring these underground passages is how quickly they make you forget the world above. The surface has wind, stars, trees, and sky. The underground has none of that. It has only stone, darkness, cold, and silence. Yet it is not frightening. It is deeply peaceful, the kind of peaceful that makes you adjust your breathing without realizing it, the kind that makes you feel as if the mountain is sharing one of its slower pulses with you. Eventually, after walking through long corridors and stepping carefully over rocks that have not moved in centuries, you reach a point where the air feels heavier, not in a burdensome way, just denser. This is where the tunnel begins to narrow. Your footsteps echo more strongly. The floor slopes upward, and suddenly, after a final turn, light reappears, faint at first, then stronger. This return to light feels different from the descent into darkness. On the way in, light fades gradually. On the way out, darkness loosens its grip faster than you expect. When you finally step back into the open air, the sky looks enormous. The cold feels different. The sounds feel brighter. You realize how quiet the tunnels were only after you leave them. Standing outside again, with starlight on the snow and the forest around you breathing its slow nighttime rhythm, you understand something simple. The underground world of Mount Shasta is not mysterious. It is not hiding anything. It is simply doing what time does, creating shapes, holding cold, holding memory. The tunnels are not destinations. They are passages through the mountain's history. They let you walk through time that is cooled and settled. They let you feel the patience of geology in the same way the surface lets you feel the vastness of the sky. Deep underground, the mountain remembers its heat. Above ground, it remembers its snow. And between the two layers, everything fits perfectly into place. A mountain is not just a shape on the horizon. It is a long, slow memory. And when you walk through its tunnels, you walk through that memory gently, step by step. By the time night has fully gathered itself around Mount Shasta, the mountain begins to reveal one of its quietest companions. Fog. Not the thin, delicate kind that drifts lazily above a meadow, nor the cinematic kind that rolls in dramatically, as if it has an appointment. The fog on Mount Shasta behaves differently. It moves with a kind of thoughtful slowness, as if it is trying not to interrupt anything. It settles across the slopes with the same softness you might expect from a thick blanket being pulled up on a cold night. Fog forms here because of the way cold mountain air mixes with the moisture rising from the forest below. Warm air moves upward, cold air slides downward. They meet halfway and decide to form a large, floating cloud that refuses to pick a long-term direction. The fog is not in a hurry to go anywhere. It prefers to drift, to linger, and sometimes to forget what it was doing in the first place. On some nights, the fog moves in so gradually that hikers do not even notice it at first. One moment the trail is clear. The trees are tall and familiar. The snow sparkles under moonlight. Everything feels steady. Then, without so much as a polite introduction, the fog thickens. It wraps itself around trunks and branches. It settles along the ground. It turns the world into soft shapes and blurry outlines. This is not a dramatic transformation. It does not happen suddenly. The fog simply increases its presence like someone inching closer during a conversation until you realize you cannot see their face anymore. 1 minute you are admiring the pattern of pine needles. The next minute you are staring at a soft white wall that used to be the trail. People who hike here often talk about that moment when the fog becomes so dense that they lose sense of direction. They describe it as confusing, surprising, odd, but also strangely calming. The fog muffles sound. It reduces visibility. It changes the entire mood of the forest. Yet it does all this without any sense of urgency. Fog on Mount Shasta does not try to scare anyone. It simply wants to exist. There is a reason fog behaves so impeccably here. The mountain encourages it. Tall slopes push warm air upward. Cold air descends quickly at night. Moisture collects in the valleys and rises whenever the temperature changes. The fog gathers from all sides until it becomes thick enough to hide even the nearest tree trunk. It is not trying to confuse hikers. Fog just has a habit of being in the right place at the right time for maximum effect. If fog had a personality, the fog on Shasta would be the kind that enjoys rearranging the world into softer shapes. It would quietly glide between trees and say something like, "I have decided this area looks better without sharp edges." Then it would continue its slow walk, leaving behind only muted silhouettes of rocks and branches. Hikers who encounter this fog sometimes feel as though the mountain has erased the trail. This is not entirely accurate. The trail is still there. It has not moved. It has not changed. It is simply resting beneath a very polite curtain of cloud. The fog does not remove paths. It only hides them temporarily, the same way a misplaced sweater accidentally hides your car keys. Nature is full of these small misunderstandings. The best advice for walking through Shasta fog is simple: slow down. The fog requires a slower pace, not because it is dangerous, but because it invites a different rhythm. When visibility shrinks to a few feet, you begin to notice things you overlooked before: the texture of the soil beneath your boots, the way snow crunches in softer tones, the faint glow of light bouncing off the mist, the quiet of your own breath. Fog has a remarkable ability to adjust the world to a quieter volume. When sound travels through fog, it becomes softer. Voices sound closer. Footsteps feel less important. Even wind becomes gentle. The fog does not silence the world. It edits the world, trimming away the sharpness until everything feels peaceful. Some hikers report hearing their own footsteps echo in ways they never expected. The fog reflects sound in unusual patterns. Sometimes the echo seems to come from behind, sometimes from above, sometimes from a place that does not make sense. This can be confusing, but it is also strangely entertaining. Fog does not care about acoustics. It simply lets sound wander around until the mountain absorbs it. Every once in a while, the fog creates strange illusions. A tree only 5 feet away can become a towering shape that looks 2 stories tall. A small rock can look like a sitting animal. A fallen branch can look like an outstretched hand. These illusions do not last long. They disappear as soon as you take 2 more steps. Fog likes to play with perspective, not to trick you, just to gently remind you that your eyes need contrast to function properly. The funniest part of this is watching how people react to these illusions. They stare intensely, they squint, they hold their headlamp at various angles, and then they slowly realize that the mysterious shape is a log, a very normal, very motionless log. Fog is an expert at turning ordinary objects into temporary mysteries. If fog had a sense of humor, this would be one of its favorite activities. But what truly sets Mount Shasta fog apart is how it moves. The fog does not sit in one place. It drifts, it flows, it lifts, it sinks. Sometimes it moves sideways, which feels unfair because even clouds should respect traditional directions. When the fog shifts suddenly, the world transforms around you, as if someone has changed the set on a stage production. One moment you are inside a white tunnel. The next moment the fog pulls away like a curtain, revealing trees that were missing just moments before. There are times when the fog behaves like a forgetful traveler. It gathers around the trail, then wanders away, then returns again, as if it remembered something important. Fog on Mount Shasta does not follow strict patterns. It does not apologize for its indecision. It simply moves according to temperature, moisture, and a vague sense of curiosity. The real challenge comes when the fog becomes so thick that hikers begin to lose orientation. Trails that were obvious just minutes earlier become invisible. Cairns become indistinct. Footprints vanish. Even the slope of the mountain becomes difficult to judge. It is easy to understand why people describe these moments as disorienting. But it is important to remember that the fog is not malicious. It is not trying to cause trouble. It is simply moving where the air pushes it. If you stop and breathe slowly, the fog begins to feel less intimidating. You start to notice its softness, the way it clings gently to branches, the way it holds light inside itself, the way it floats at knee height in some places and shoulder height in others. The fog is not a wall, it is a veil, thin enough to move through, thick enough to blur the world, soft enough to make even large boulders look like sleeping animals. The forest experiences fog in its own quiet way. Pine needles collect tiny droplets. Those droplets gather until they fall. The droplets hit the ground with tiny taps. If you stand still long enough, you can hear them. A slow, rhythmic pattern. Drip. Pause. Drip. It sounds like the forest is practicing its own version of meditation. Even branches lower under the weight of moisture, then straighten slowly once the fog lifts. Animals react in practical ways. Deer move more carefully. Birds stay closer to lower branches. Small creatures hide beneath logs or stay still to avoid drawing attention. Not because they fear the fog, because they are smart. Fog means predators cannot see well. Fog means sound behaves strangely. Fog means survival requires small adjustments. Animals understand this instinctively. Humans understand it after bumping into the same tree twice. The mountain itself seems to enjoy the fog. The slopes disappear smoothly into white. The ridges dissolve. The peak hides completely. If mountains could enjoy privacy, Shasta would certainly appreciate these moments. Fog wraps around its slopes like a large woolen shawl. The mountain becomes less of a landmark and more of a presence. Something quiet, something thoughtful, something resting. Eventually the fog begins to thin. The process is just as slow and gentle as the arrival. The air warms slightly. The weight of moisture lifts. Visibility expands 1 foot at a time. Trees reappear, rocks regain their shape. The trail returns as if emerging from sleep. Hikers look around and say things like, "I was sure that tree was taller," or "I thought that rock was moving." The fog accepts these misunderstandings gracefully. Once the fog clears completely, the world feels brighter than before. Colors sharpen, shadows deepen, snow glows. It is as if the mountain has been polished. The fog leaves behind a faint dampness on everything it touched. The earth looks darker. The trunks look smoother. The pine needles gleam. Fog never leaves a mess. It leaves a soft memory of its presence. Fog is not a mystery on Mount Shasta. It is a natural part of the mountain's rhythm. It comes when the air cools. It goes when the air warms. It hides things gently. It reveals them slowly. It teaches hikers one simple habit: always move with intention. And so, when the fog forgets the path, it is not a challenge, it is an invitation to slow down, to breathe, to appreciate the world in softer shapes, to let the mountain remind you that not everything needs to be seen clearly to be understood. Fog is simply the mountain's way of reshaping the night, calmly, softly, with a sense of humor and absolutely no concern for your sense of direction. There is a certain stillness that settles over Mount Shasta once midnight begins drifting across the slopes, the kind of stillness that feels as though someone has gently turned down the volume of the entire world. The wind becomes softer. The forest breathes more slowly. Even the snow underfoot seems to quiet itself, as if it does not want to interrupt anything that might be listening. In this calm, stories about disappearances find space to linger. If you stand on a ridge overlooking the tree line, it is easy to see how these stories began. The forest stretches out like a deep green sea. The ground drops and rises unpredictably. Trails twist in ways that feel logical in daylight but forget their purpose in the dark. The mountain is beautiful, but it is also vast. And vast landscapes have a way of making people feel both amazed and tiny at the same time. Over the years, people have spoken about hikers who vanished on Mount Shasta, not dozens at once, not in some dramatic, cinematic event, but scattered across decades. A lost backpacker here, a confused wanderer there. Some cases were resolved quickly. The person stumbled out of the forest hours later, tired, cold, and deeply regretful about their snack choices. Others took longer to resolve. And a few, despite search teams and long efforts, were never fully explained. These stories, understandably, became fuel for the imagination. People love a good mystery. They love connecting dots that may or may not belong to the same picture. They enjoy the thrill of wondering what might exist, out of sight. But on a mountain like Shasta, the truth is usually quieter than the stories that circulate online. The most common explanation for disappearances on Mount Shasta is also the simplest. People get lost. Not because they are careless, not because something unusual calls them away, but because the landscape is larger and more complex than it appears. A single wrong step on a poorly marked trail can lead someone into a maze of trees that look identical. A shift in fog can erase landmarks. A sudden drop in temperature can change instinct into confusion. Mount Shasta has terrain that behaves like a master illusionist. Trails fork unexpectedly. Meadows appear where none were expected. Shadows create false shapes. And snow, with its quiet confidence, covers every sign of human passage within minutes. The softness of the landscape can hide distance. A slope that looks gentle from afar may reveal itself to be steeper once approached. A valley that seems reachable within minutes can take an hour. Nature has a sense of humor about these things. One of the most underestimated factors is simply tiredness. A hiker may begin their journey with enthusiasm. Then night falls, the temperature drops, the air becomes thin. Suddenly the brain begins making decisions that would not make sense if written on paper. Should I turn left or right? Should I keep climbing or go back? Should I follow this shadow that may or may not be a fallen tree? The mind begins to wander and the feet follow. The forest at night is both soothing and disorienting. All trees look similar. All sounds blend into one another. A gentle breeze brushing against branches can sound like footsteps. A shifting shadow can look like a figure. And the deeper someone walks into this environment, the more their sense of direction slips quietly out of their pocket. Not because they are frightened, but because the forest is simply too good at hiding its paths. Hypothermia plays a role too. At higher altitudes, the temperature can fall below freezing even in seasons that feel warm during the day. A person who is slightly wet from sweat or melted snow can lose body heat quickly. As the temperature drops, judgment blurs. Decision-making becomes fuzzy. The person might wander without realizing they are wandering. The forest does not need to be hostile to create these conditions. The mountain does not need to be dramatic. Cold alone is enough to turn orientation into a puzzle missing half its pieces. Another factor is the terrain. Shasta's slopes are full of hidden variations. There are pockets of loose rock that behave like marbles, steep ravines that appear only when someone is close enough to see them, fallen logs hidden under moss, branches that catch clothing. All of these things slow a person down or push them off their intended path without any intention or malice. The mountain is not trying to confuse anyone. It is simply doing what mountains have always done, standing quietly while people try to walk across it. Because these disappearances stretch over decades, the stories eventually found their way online, and the internet, as it often does, expanded them. Threads appeared, videos appeared, dramatic retellings appeared. The simple act of someone getting lost slowly grew into something more mysterious. People enjoy interpreting the unknown, especially when they are sitting safely at home with a warm drink. But the reality remains grounded. Every case has environmental factors that make sense. Weather shifts, poor visibility, nightfall, disorientation, inexperience. Even experienced hikers can lose track of direction in dense fog or thick forest. And sometimes people simply choose the wrong path in the wrong moment. Search and rescue teams on Mount Shasta are well aware of these patterns. They understand how valleys funnel sound so that shouting becomes difficult to locate. They understand how snow erases footprints. They understand how someone might walk in circles without meaning to. They understand how far a person can drift from a trail in only a few minutes. One rescuer once explained it this way: "The mountain is not taking anyone. It is just very good at hiding them by accident." That sentence captures the essence of these disappearances perfectly. The mountain does not swallow people. It simply holds its silence while people walk through it. In the soft quiet of nighttime, that silence feels even deeper. If you stand alone on the trail, the forest seems endless. The darkness merges with the trees. The snow reflects the sky in faint shades of silver. It is peaceful. It is beautiful. It is also a reminder that humans are small in comparison to landscapes that have existed long before trails were carved. Some of the stories about disappearances mention that people were seen walking confidently moments before they vanished. That is not unusual. Confidence does not prevent someone from stepping into fog or turning onto a side path that looks correct but is not. Trails on Shasta sometimes split at angles that are gentle enough to look like one continuous path. A hiker may follow the wrong branch for 20 minutes before realizing that something feels different. Another detail that often appears in retellings is the idea of sudden silence, as though the forest somehow changed its behavior at the exact moment something happened. But forests on mountains shift their moods constantly. Wind changes direction. Animals pause. Snow falls more thickly. Branches sway. The forest is not performing. It is simply breathing. Over the years, the mystery of these disappearances has been exaggerated to the point of sounding like folklore. Yet the reality is that most missing persons were eventually found, either safely or after long searches. Their stories, when pieced together, form a pattern that is entirely understandable. People wander, people get cold, people take shortcuts that become long cuts. People underestimate the time it takes to return to the trailhead. People trust their instincts, even when their instincts are quietly malfunctioning from altitude. The beauty of Mount Shasta is also its challenge. The mountain is playful in its design. Trails weave gently, meadows stretch wide, forests shift density. What looks clear one moment becomes hidden the next. Even experienced hikers can become disoriented if fog rolls in or if snow begins falling heavily. It is the combination of beauty and unpredictability that creates these rare disappearances, not because the mountain is mysterious, but because nature does not simplify itself for human convenience. The internet enjoys adding layers on top of the truth. The stories grow, speculation grows. The unknown becomes a stage for imagination. But in the sleep-like quiet of the mountain itself, the explanation remains simple. The forest is large. The night is cold. The terrain is complex. And humans sometimes take the scenic route unintentionally. If you walk through the forest slowly at night, you begin to understand how easily the world can shift around you. Footsteps sound different. Shapes blur, branches sway. Even the air feels like it has changed its texture. You are not being watched. You are not being followed. You are simply moving through a landscape that does not flatten itself into straight lines. Yet despite these challenges, the mountain does not feel threatening. The forest does not feel aggressive. The night does not feel dangerous. Everything feels calm, steady, ancient, in a way that does not require interpretation. The mountain is simply continuing its long habit of existing, while humans continue their shorter habit of wandering. The most poetic way to describe these disappearances is also the truest. The forest does not swallow anyone, it only hides their footprints beneath its own silence. And that silence is not hostile. It is gentle, soft, old. The kind of silence that invites you to stop walking, take a deep breath, and remember where you are. Not lost, not watched, not endangered. Simply standing in the middle of a landscape that is much larger than your sense of direction. Mount Shasta has a long memory. People sometimes step into that memory and forget the way back for a moment. But the mountain is not trying to keep anyone. It only knows how to be quiet. There is a moment on Mount Shasta, usually sometime after the afternoon sunlight begins sliding into softer shades, when the air starts to feel different. The change is subtle, a little lighter, a little cooler, a little too gentle to be dramatic, but noticeable enough that visitors tend to pause and take a deeper breath. This moment is often the beginning of conversations about something people love to call the vortex. The word vortex sounds exciting. It sounds like something that might pull objects into the sky or rearrange your hairstyle without permission. But on Mount Shasta, the idea of a vortex is far less dramatic. It is mostly a way for people to describe an unusual feeling that the mountain creates. A feeling of lightness, a sense of being slightly lifted inside your own chest. It is not a funnel of swirling force. It is not an energy field with glowing borders. It is simply a sensation that blooms quietly when altitude, cold air, and wide open space meet in the right combination. People who visit the mountain sometimes talk about this feeling with a kind of gentle excitement. They stand on a slope, let the breeze hit their face, inhale deeply, and then say something like, "It feels different here." Others nod. Everyone takes another breath. And then the conversation continues, without any real conclusion, because sometimes feelings do not need explanations. They simply exist, like shy guests who prefer not to be introduced. The scientific explanation for this sensation is straightforward. At higher altitudes, the air becomes thinner. Thinner air means less oxygen per breath. When your body receives less oxygen, the brain responds by creating a sense of lightness. Not dizziness, not danger. More like the feeling you get after standing up too quickly, minus the part where you regret standing up too quickly. For some people, this sensation feels pleasant. A little floaty, a little dreamy, as if the sky has become lighter and has invited you to join it. The mountain also affects the atmosphere around it. Cold air moves differently than warm air. Wind flows along the slopes in smooth currents that create a kind of natural massage. The body reacts to this subtle airflow. Shoulders relax, muscles loosen, breathing becomes deeper. When people say they feel energy on the mountain, what they are often feeling is the combined effect of oxygen levels, temperature, and natural beauty. Still, the word vortex persists. It has charm. It has personality. It makes a simple sensation sound like an event. If you told someone, "I felt slightly oxygen deprived at the summit," they might look concerned. If you tell them, "I felt the vortex," they immediately imagine something more poetic. And human beings love poetry. There is another reason this idea spreads so easily. Mount Shasta is enormous. When you stand on one of its ridges, the world opens in every direction. Valleys stretch far below, clouds brush the upper slopes. The horizon curves so gently that you begin to understand why people think the sky is gently holding the mountain in place. The openness of the landscape creates an emotional lightness. Even without altitude effects, standing on wide, empty space can make anyone feel taller inside. It is no surprise that people come here to meditate. They bring blankets, sit on warm patches of granite, close their eyes, and let the wind move past them. The mountain is quiet enough that you can hear your own heartbeat if you are patient. The rhythm slows. Breathing becomes smooth. The silence begins to feel thick and comforting. People describe this as energy, but it is really the body shifting into calm when noise and movement finally step aside. There is also the effect of contrast. In daily life, people are surrounded by constant stimulation, screens, traffic, notifications that appear at the worst possible times. When they arrive on Mount Shasta, that stimulation falls away. The brain suddenly has more space, more quiet, more room to think gently. This shift can feel dramatic, especially to someone who has not paused in weeks. If the mind were a cluttered room, the mountain would be the window that someone finally opened. Visitors who believe strongly in the idea of vortex energy often stand very still as they describe what they feel. They tilt their heads slightly upward. They close their eyes as if concentrating on the wind. Then they smile softly and whisper, "I feel heavier in my feet and lighter in my head." This happens when oxygen levels drop just enough to create a mild upward sensation in the chest. Nothing dangerous, nothing mystical, just biology acting adorable. To be fair, altitude sensations do not affect everyone the same way. Some people feel light and inspired. Others feel like they need a snack. A few feel sleepy. The mountain does not discriminate. It offers the same air to everyone. What people do with that air is up to them. If you hike up to a higher viewpoint, the sense of spaciousness becomes even stronger. The trees appear smaller. The landscape widens. The wind becomes more constant. The clouds drift slowly across the sky like ancient travelers who forgot their destination. It is difficult not to feel something in a place like this. Not energy in the dramatic sense, but something gentle and grounding. A typical conversation on these viewpoints goes like this. Someone takes a breath and says, "Do you feel that?" Someone else nods and replies, "I think so." And then, instead of identifying exactly what they feel, they both stand there quietly and stare at the horizon like two people waiting for a dramatic plot twist that never arrives. Still, there is something beautiful about the idea of a vortex, even if the scientific explanation is simple. Humans like naming sensations. We like creating stories around experiences. We like giving poetic language to things that move us. If someone feels calm and renewed on the mountain, calling it energy is not harmful. It is simply a way of celebrating the moment. But Mount Shasta is more than just altitude and quiet air. It is a landscape made of contrasts: warm sun, cold wind, hard stone, soft snow, wide sky, deep valleys. These contrasts do something to the mind. They remind you that the world is bigger than schedules and alarms. They encourage the body to slow down. When the body slows, emotions rise gently. People feel connected, not to anything mystical, just to the simple fact that they are tiny humans standing on a massive pile of ancient earth. The humorous part of all this is how earnestly people try to identify the exact location of the vortex. Some say it is on the south slope. Others insist it is near a certain meadow. One person claimed it was located precisely on a rock shaped like a giant potato. Another pointed at a seemingly ordinary patch of dirt and said, "It is definitely here. I can feel it in my elbows." The mountain listens to all these debates without reacting. The truth is that the entire mountain can feel like a vortex if you listen to it long enough. Not because of energy fields or swirling forces, but because the mountain is genuinely good at creating an atmosphere of calm. Whenever wind flows in steady lines along the slopes, it feels like a gentle current. Whenever thin air creates softness in the chest, it feels like elevation inside your body. Whenever sunlight expands across the snow, it feels like warmth blooming from within. These things combined form a sensation that humans interpret as special. Scientists would describe it differently. They would mention oxygen levels, air pressure, mild hypoxia, and the power of suggestion. They would say the brain assigns meaning to physical sensations. They would point out that thin air can make colors seem brighter because the eyes work differently in low oxygen. They would explain that the sensation of floating is a known effect of breathing slightly faster than usual. But trying to explain feelings with charts does not always satisfy the heart. People come to Mount Shasta not to read about biology, but to step into a landscape that lets them feel lighter. And the mountain delivers that feeling easily, with no effort at all. Even someone who refuses to believe in vortexes will eventually take a deep breath at the summit and feel something shift gently inside them. It could be the altitude, it could be the silence, it could be the fact that standing above the clouds makes everyone feel a little more poetic than normal. Whatever the cause, the effect is undeniable. People feel different up here. On some evenings when the sky is clear and the air is cold, the experience becomes even more pronounced. The entire world below looks small and quiet. The stars appear brighter. The horizon glows softly. The wind moves with a steady rhythm that feels almost like breath. You stand there, inhaling thin air, exhaling warm breath, and for a moment, your body forgets the weight of everything you carried. This moment is what people mean when they talk about vortex energy. It is a moment when altitude and atmosphere and emptiness come together to create a gentle, upward feeling in the heart. The mountain does not radiate force. It does not create invisible currents. It does not pull or push anything. It simply stands there, patient and enormous, while humans walk across its back, feeling a little lighter than usual. And honestly, feeling lighter is enough. It does not need any dramatic explanation, and it does not need a mystical label. It is simply what happens when a tired mind meets a wide sky. In the end, the vortex is not a swirling mystery. It is simply the mountain inviting you to breathe differently, to slow down, to feel the air more carefully, to let the world underneath your feet soften for a moment. If the mountain could speak, it would probably shrug and say, "I am just tall. You are just tired. Our partnership works nicely." And maybe that is the real magic of Mount Shasta. Not energy, not mystery, just altitude, and a silence so wide that the heart feels a little weightless inside it. There is a small town resting at the base of Mount Shasta, a town so quiet that even the wind seems to soften its footsteps when passing through. The streets are simple, the houses are warm, the shops look as if they were built by people who wanted visitors to feel welcome without needing to ask for anything. Life here has a slower rhythm, not lazy, not sleepy, just steady, as though time has learned to walk at half speed. The people who live in this town often describe their days as peaceful. They wake up to a view that would take most visitors a long moment to absorb. The mountain rises beyond the rooftops, tall and white, appearing every morning like a generous friend who has already been awake for centuries. The locals have grown used to this view, or so they say. But if you watch closely, you will sometimes see them glancing up at the mountain while sipping their morning coffee, as if checking in, as if silently saying, "Good morning, old friend." Most towns have a sound that defines them: traffic, crowds, music from cafes. But Mount Shasta town has a different soundtrack. The sound of quiet conversations drifting through open doors. The sound of boots brushing across pine needles. The sound of distant water rolling over rocks. Even the dogs seem to bark more softly, as though they are trying to be considerate of the mountain nearby. In the center of town sits a row of small shops. None of them are flashy. Each one looks like it was designed with the idea that customers would wander in because they felt curious, not because of any grand advertisement. There is a bakery that opens early. The owner is a woman who claims she does not bake for tourists, but for the mountain. She says the mountain likes the smell of warm bread. No one argues with her, mostly because the bread is too good to risk upsetting her sense of routine. Next to the bakery is a small shop that sells handmade hiking gear. The owner repairs backpacks in the back room while chatting with customers about which trails are the best for sunsets. He speaks slowly, with the calm of someone who has spent most of his life walking up and down slopes. He never rushes. He once said that rushing on the mountain is like trying to run through deep snow. You can do it, but you will look funny and probably regret it. Farther down the street, there is a bookstore. The bookstore is small enough that you can walk from one end to the other in less than a minute. But no one ever does. Everyone moves slowly inside, touching the spines, reading the handwritten notes left by the owner, and occasionally looking out the window as the shadow of the mountain shifts. The owner likes to say that the mountain helps him organize the books. By this, he means that whenever he feels tired, he steps outside, looks at the sky, then remembers which shelf was waiting for him. The system works, mostly. Visitors often ask the locals whether they ever feel overwhelmed living next to such a huge mountain. The locals always smile, a soft smile, the kind that suggests they have answered this question 1,000 times. Most of them say something like, "It is like living beside a very old friend, the kind of friend who does not talk much, but is always there." And it is true. The mountain has a presence, a quiet presence, a presence that makes everything else feel slightly less urgent. Tourists arrive throughout the year. Some come with big cameras. Some come with hiking poles that look new enough to still smell like a sporting goods store. Others come with notebooks, ready to capture moments of inspiration. The locals welcome them kindly. They point them toward trails, give advice about weather changes, and gently remind them to carry more water than they think they need. The mountain has a reputation for being generous with views, but strict with hydration. Tourism supports much of the town. Small inns line the edges of the streets. They are rarely fancy. Most of them feel like guest rooms in a friend's home rather than traditional hotels. Visitors wake up to wooden floors that creak softly, windows that open to crisp morning air, and the sight of the mountain framed like a painting. There are also hot springs nearby, pools of warm water hidden among rocks and trees. These springs attract people who want to soak, rest, and forget about the world for a while. The water is warm enough to melt tension from tired muscles. Locals often visit during quiet evenings, sitting in the water while watching mist rise slowly into the cold air. They do not talk much. They simply sit there, letting the day dissolve without ceremony. The rhythm of life in this town is slow but not stagnant. It flows gently like a shallow stream. People wake early but move at a pace that inspires others to calm down. A walk to the grocery store might take longer than expected because neighbors stop to greet each other. Conversations happen in the street, in the bakery, beside the hot springs. They are not long, dramatic conversations, more like small exchanges that keep the town feeling connected. The mountain watches all of this without comment. Some evenings, the sky turns pink behind the peak. The light spreads across the slopes in wide, soft strokes. The town becomes quiet as everyone settles into their routines. Children play outside until the last bit of daylight fades. Older residents sit on porches, sipping tea. Dogs wander lazily between yards. It is a place where small details matter. The smell of pine, the crunch of gravel, the way the air cools at sunset, the steady patience of the mountain. People who move here from larger cities often say that the first few weeks feel strange, not because the town is unusual, but because it is peaceful in a way they are not used to. They look for noise that does not exist. They anticipate traffic that never arrives. It takes time for them to adjust to the quiet. But once they do, the mountain becomes part of their internal rhythm. Visitors planning short stays sometimes end up staying much longer. They claim the mountain slowed their thoughts, calmed their breathing, helped them sleep better. Locals smile when they hear this. They know the effect well. They also know that the mountain does not do anything special. It simply exists with such steady presence that people naturally settle when they are near it. Living beside Mount Shasta means living with a constant reminder that nature holds its own time. The mountain does not care about deadlines. It does not hurry through storms. It does not rush the seasons. Snow falls when it falls. Flowers bloom when they bloom. Everything happens according to a rhythm that has existed long before people arrived. One resident once described the experience perfectly. He said, while stirring his coffee, "The mountain teaches you to relax your shoulders." At first it sounds like a poetic exaggeration. But then you spend a few days in the town. You walk down the main street. You feel the cold air on your face. You watch the mountain stand there like the calmest creature on earth. And suddenly, your shoulders truly do settle. People here are not untouched by the modern world. They have phones and laptops and schedules, but they use them differently. They take breaks. They pause. They step outside often. They look up at the sky a little more than most. The mountain influences their habits not because of any mysterious force, but because it is impossible to ignore something so large, so quiet, and so steady. Farmers work in nearby fields where soil is dark and rich from volcanic history. Their crops grow well, their mornings start early, their evenings end calmly. They speak about the mountain in practical terms. It gives water when the snow melts. It offers shade. It affects the temperature. But even these practical residents glance at the peak with a hint of affection. The mountain is part of the culture, not a symbol, not a mystery, just a constant presence that shapes schedules, moods, and weekend plans. There is humor too, the kind that comes from long familiarity. Locals joke about how many tourists ask the exact same questions. They joke about how the mountain changes color 5 times a day and still manages to surprise them. They joke about how the weather forecast should always include a line that says, or something completely different. The mountain has a habit of changing its mind. Clouds roll in unexpectedly. Winds shift without warning. Rain appears and disappears within minutes. Locals accept this with patient good humor. Living beside a mountain like Shasta is not dramatic. It is gentle, it is steady. It feels like living beside a companion who never interrupts, but always listens. A companion who does not need attention, but offers quiet comfort, simply by existing. At night, when the town settles under soft layers of darkness, the mountain fades into silhouette. Street lights glow faintly. The air cools enough to make people wrap sweaters around their shoulders. If you walk down the street during these hours, you will see windows glowing softly and hear the faint sounds of dishes being washed. Everything feels peaceful. Everything feels familiar. Everything feels held in a quiet embrace. The people who live here do not think of themselves as special. They simply think of themselves as individuals lucky enough to wake up beside a mountain that has learned the art of patience. They live slowly, but not without intention. They savor small moments, a warm loaf of bread, a cup of tea on a porch, a walk through fresh snow, a night at the hot springs, a glance at the peak as the sky turns gold. In the end, life in this town is defined not by events, but by atmosphere, a calm atmosphere, a steady atmosphere, an atmosphere shaped by the presence of a silent, ancient companion who stands patiently at the edge of every morning. Living beside Mount Shasta is not an adventure. It is a relationship, a gentle one, a quiet one, the kind you grow into without realizing it, the kind that reminds you every day that the world can be simple and still feel full. When the last glow of evening fades behind Mount Shasta, the forest begins its slow transformation into a world made almost entirely of shadows and breath. The final bit of daylight does not disappear all at once. It slips away carefully, like a polite guest who does not want to disturb anyone. Once it is gone, the night takes its place with a quiet confidence, spreading across the treetops in a soft blue wash that deepens with every passing minute. You would think the forest becomes silent at night. That is what most people imagine, a world of complete stillness. But the truth is slightly different. The forest does not become silent. It becomes selective. It chooses which sounds to keep and which ones to hide. Footsteps soften. Breathing slows. The heartbeat becomes a private sound. But the wind remains. And when it moves through the pine branches, it carries a music that feels older than language. The wind slips between needles with a rustling sound that rises and falls like gentle waves. It never moves at the same speed for long. Sometimes it drifts lazily, brushing tree trunks with the softness of a sleeping animal. Sometimes it flows more quickly, stirring leaves with a quiet urgency. But even at its strongest, the wind here never feels intrusive. It behaves like a friendly guide that walks slightly ahead of you, touching branches lightly to show the way. Pine needles respond to the wind with a delicate whisper, not harsh, not sharp. A whisper shaped by thousands of thin green blades moving together in harmony. If you stop and listen, it almost sounds like a long sigh of contentment, a sound that says everything is fine. Keep walking, the night is safe. That is the strange magic of forests at night. They look dark and mysterious, but the sounds carry reassurance. Sometimes the wind carries with it the faint scent of cold stone or snow drifting from the upper slopes. These scents are subtle, but they add a crisp texture to the air. You inhale and feel the clean bite of winter mixed with the softer aroma of sap. Pine forests have a way of reminding you that nature can be both sharp and gentle at the same time. As the wind continues its slow journey, the next sound joins it, the sound of snow falling. Snowfall at night behaves differently. When the world is dark and still, snow seems to drift more carefully. Each flake makes a faint sound when it lands. Something between a tap and a sigh. One flake is hardly noticeable, but when thousands fall together, they create a kind of hush that settles over the landscape. A hush that seems to smooth out every sharp corner in the world. Walking through fresh nighttime snow feels like walking over a soft blanket that has been laid out just for you. The ground absorbs your footsteps so completely that it almost feels like you are floating. Every step creates a gentle crunch, a sound so satisfying that you might briefly forget you are supposed to be paying attention to where you are going. If snow had feelings, it might feel pleased to be stepped on so respectfully. Beneath this quiet symphony, the animals of the night begin to stir. The first to appear is often the mule deer. Their movements are slow, deliberate, and filled with an elegance that seems unfair to anyone who has ever tried to walk quietly in winter boots. Mule deer have large ears that rotate like tiny satellite dishes. They turn them toward every sound. A crack of ice, a shifting branch, your heartbeat if you are close enough. Their ears move with such precision that you may feel slightly judged, as though the deer is evaluating your hiking skills. The mule deer graze calmly beneath the trees, their breath creating small clouds that drift for a moment before disappearing. When they walk, their hooves make almost no sound. This is impressive considering the fact that you can barely take 2 steps without sounding like a traveling snowplow. Deer have mastered the art of gentle movement. If you ever want to feel humble, watch a mule deer walk away from you without disturbing so much as a grain of snow. Farther into the forest, a black bear may be awake, shuffling slowly under the canopy. Black bears on Mount Shasta are not known for drama. They do not roar. They do not stomp aggressively. At night, they prefer peaceful activities. Foraging for berries left from late summer. Turning over logs with the calm curiosity of someone checking a drawer. Walking with a slow confidence that makes you understand why people respect them. If you ever see a black bear from a distance, you may notice it has the same attitude as a person browsing a grocery store aisle. Calm, focused, slightly indecisive. The bear examines logs, sniffs the ground, and moves with the rhythm of someone who is in no hurry whatsoever. Black bears often look like they are thinking about something important, but there is no way to know what. It could be food. It could be the direction of the wind. It could be nothing at all. Bears are delightfully private. A lynx might be prowling nearby, stepping through the snow with the weightlessness of a ghost. Lynxes move so quietly that even the forest seems unaware of their presence. Their large paws spread their weight across the snow like soft pillows, allowing them to walk without sinking. Their eyes reflect the moonlight, glowing faintly like tiny lanterns. If the mule deer makes you feel humble, the lynx will make you feel like a clumsy tourist in comparison. Lynxes are solitary creatures. They walk in careful arcs. They pause for long moments. They tilt their heads slightly, listening for the softest rustle. When they leap, it is so smooth that it barely seems real. If ballet dancers could train in forests, they would study lynxes for posture inspiration. Even their whiskers look disciplined. Overhead there is another resident of the forest, the white owl. Its wings unfold with deliberate grace. When it flies, the feathers cut through the air in total silence. Owls were not designed to respect the laws of acoustics. They glide like shadows that have decided to detach from the ground. The white owl sits on a branch for long periods, blinking slowly, observing everything. If owls could speak, they would probably say something very wise. Then immediately pretend they never said anything at all. When the owl finally takes off, the movement is so smooth that the branch beneath it barely shakes. One moment it is perched like a snowy ornament. The next moment it becomes a drifting silhouette, crossing the sky without leaving a trace. It is easy to understand why people imagine owls as guardians of the forest. Not because they have mystical qualities, but because they move with a confidence that belongs to creatures who understand nighttime better than humans ever will. The moon plays its part too. On clear nights, it hangs above the mountain like a silver coin. Its light touches the snow in soft streaks. It paints the treetops with a pale glow. It creates shadows that stretch across the ground in long, blurry lines. These shadows are gentle. They shift when the wind moves. They ripple like reflections on a lake. The forest under moonlight becomes something soft and otherworldly. Not strange, just dreamlike. When clouds drift across the sky, the moonlight changes. It dims. It brightens. It becomes a moving river of light. Sometimes the moon hides behind the peak for several minutes, leaving the forest in complete darkness. Then it reappears with quiet majesty, like someone returning to a room after deciding they forgot something important. Even the stars seem to reposition themselves to watch this performance. In this faint glow, the forest turns into what feels like a large, still lake. Not literally, of course, there is no water stretching across the ground, but the atmosphere carries the same sense of deep calm you would find beside a lake that has forgotten how to ripple. The trees become tall pillars, reflected in the stillness. The snow becomes soft white canvas. The branches resemble the graceful arcs of water frozen in motion. If you stand still long enough, you will notice the rhythm of the forest shifting around you. The wind rises, brushing your face with a cool, gentle touch. Then it softens, leaving only the sound of distant branches swaying in slow motion. The animals move farther away. Their sounds fade. Then the night becomes a large, quiet room. The kind of room where every sound feels intentional. Every once in a while you might hear the soft crack of a branch under the weight of snow, or the distant call of an owl, or the faint rumble of snow settling on a steep slope high above the tree line. None of these sounds are alarming. They are simply the mountain adjusting itself to the night. The forest at night teaches a simple lesson. Silence is not the absence of sound. Silence is a presence, a patient one, a gentle one, the kind that makes you breathe a little deeper without realizing it. If you walk through the forest now, you may feel something unexpected. Peace, not a dramatic peace, not the kind that comes with grand revelations. Just a steady, honest peace that settles into your chest, like warm tea. Even the cold air feels soothing. It touches your face without biting. It wraps around your shoulders like a cool blanket. Every once in a while you may see the snow sparkle under moonlight. The light scatters across tiny crystals, creating faint flashes that resemble stars on the ground. You look up at the sky, then down at the snow, and it becomes unclear which view feels more beautiful. The forest does not compete with the sky. It has its own version of starlight. If you sit on a fallen log, the night becomes even richer. You hear the steady rhythm of your breath mixing with the soft hum of the forest. The wind returns in slow waves. An occasional flake of snow drifts onto your jacket. It melts instantly. A small reminder that you are warm, alive, and welcomed by the quiet. The forest is not trying to impress you. It is not telling a story. It is simply existing in its calmest form. And in this calm, there is beauty that requires no interpretation. As the night deepens, the animals settle again. The deer finds safe spots beneath the trees. The bear finds a place to rest. The lynx disappears into deeper shadows. The owl continues its silent patrol. The forest does not sleep in the way humans think of sleep. It rests. It breathes. It waits for dawn to return. And when dawn finally approaches, the first light does not arrive quickly. It grows slowly behind the mountain. The snow begins to glow. The trees turn from black to deep blue. The animals stir again. The world wakes with steady patience. The forest remembers that daylight is returning. But for now, in the deepest part of the night, everything remains still. A stillness so complete that it feels like floating. A stillness that invites you to slow your thoughts. A stillness that makes the forest feel like a calm lake with no ripples. A stillness that belongs entirely to Mount Shasta. And when winter settles on Mount Shasta, it does so with a softness that feels almost intentional. The first snowfall arrives quietly, brushing the ground with thin white strokes. Then more snow falls, and more. and eventually the mountain becomes covered in a thick, bright blanket that smooths every sharp edge and softens every sound. Winter on this mountain has a calm personality. It does not rush. It does not boast. It simply arrives, layer by gentle layer, until everything looks peaceful. What most people notice first is the silence. Fresh snow has a talent for swallowing sound. Footsteps sink softly into it. Voices become muffled. Even the wind seems to adopt a more considerate tone, as if trying not to disturb the soft surface below. But there is something else the snow does, something that makes winter feel deeper and more intimate. The snow remembers. Every footstep becomes a clear imprint. Every trail left by an animal becomes a frozen sentence written across the landscape. And unlike dirt trails or forest paths that can hide tracks, with a single gust of wind, snow remembers for a long time. Hours, days, sometimes longer depending on the weather. It holds the shapes of movement like a diary, etched in cold white pages. Walk across fresh snow, and it keeps your footsteps as carefully as if it were collecting evidence. Your boot prints appear with crisp edges. The pattern of the sole is visible. The weight of your step is recorded. Sometimes you look behind you and wonder why the snow is so intent on documenting your journey. If snow could speak, it might say, "I am not judging you. I simply enjoy keeping track." The mountain's animals contribute their own entries to this winter diary. Mule deer leave elongated impressions that show exactly where they paused and exactly where they leaped forward. Their steps look delicate, almost artistic, as if drawn by a hand that likes symmetry. Rabbits leave trails that hop forward in neat, repeating shapes. Their prints look like tiny punctuation marks. Coyotes leave long, confident tracks, perfectly aligned, as if they were practicing good posture. Sometimes you will see the tracks of a fox. Fox prints look gentle, like someone placed each paw carefully to avoid disturbing the snow. The path they leave curves playfully, weaving between trees and circling around logs in a way that suggests they were simply enjoying themselves. There is a lightness to fox tracks that gives the impression that foxes treat snow like a playground rather than a challenge. Then there are the tracks that cause a moment of hesitation, the wide impressions of a black bear, deep, heavy, purposeful. Bear tracks in winter look impressive, mostly because they remind you how large a bear's foot actually is. The snow captures every detail. The shape of the pad, the spread of the toes, the weight behind each step. Bears do not hurry. Their tracks show a calm determination, as if they knew exactly where they wanted to go and saw no reason to rush. Winter birds leave their own delicate markings, a line of tiny prints, followed by the sudden sweep of wings brushing the snow. The moment where the bird decided to take flight is recorded perfectly. One instant it was walking. The next instant it lifted away, leaving behind a soft imprint shaped like the first stroke of a watercolor painting. Snow celebrates these small stories with loyalty. The most charming thing about winter tracking is how imaginative people become when looking at animal prints. They kneel down, they tilt their heads, they study the shapes like detectives on a very peaceful case. Someone will say, "This looks like a bobcat," with the confidence of a seasoned tracker, even if they have only seen a bobcat once on a nature documentary. Another person will point and say, "Maybe it is a raccoon," and suddenly everyone is debating raccoon stride length while standing in freezing air. The snow listens to all these theories quietly. It It does not correct anyone. It simply continues holding the prints exactly as they were shaped. If snow had a sense of humor, it would probably enjoy watching humans turn simple tracks into elaborate stories. And sometimes those stories are actually true. Sometimes the tracks form a narrative you can follow. A set of deer prints leading to a patch of exposed grass. A trail of rabbit prints that suddenly shift direction, suggesting a moment of surprise. A line of coyote tracks that move steadily until they suddenly zigzag, as though the coyote smelled something interesting. Snow is a natural storyteller, but it tells stories without words. It keeps only the shapes of the journey, not the meaning behind them. This is the beautiful contradiction of winter tracking. The snow remembers everything, but it does not explain anything. It holds the shape of movement, but not the emotion behind it. You can see where a deer stopped, but not why. You can see where a fox changed direction, but not what caught its attention. You can see where a rabbit paused, but not what it was thinking. Snow remembers the path, but never the story. Humans behave similarly. We walk through winter trails, leaving our own prints behind. We take long steps when the snow is deep, shorter steps when we are careful. Sometimes we walk in straight lines, sometimes in meandering curves. Sometimes we stop to admire a view or adjust our scarf. And the snow records every one of these choices with perfect neutrality. It does not exaggerate. It does not critique. It simply remembers. There is something comforting in this. Snow does not judge the direction we choose. It does not favor the purposeful stride over the hesitant step. It holds them with the same softness. It remembers all footsteps equally. You could walk confidently or wander in circles. The snow would preserve both, with the same calm patience. On certain days, snowdrifts gather beside fallen logs, creating tiny white dunes. When wind passes through the forest, it brushes against the surface, making thin patterns that resemble ripples on water. If you walk across these drifts, your footprints appear with dramatic definition, deep impressions with tall edges. They look like small sculptures carved into the ground. Snow is excellent at making even clumsy steps look significant. But snow is also selective in its memory. A fresh snowfall can erase everything within minutes, covering the old tracks with new, untouched surfaces. It is as if the mountain turns a page in its winter diary, giving itself a clean slate. Tracks that once told a story disappear quickly, replaced by smooth whiteness. The forest becomes quiet again. The snow, patient as always, waits for new footsteps. In this way, winter teaches a simple truth. Nothing is kept forever, but everything is held for long enough to matter. When the night deepens, the snow becomes even more expressive. Moonlight turns its surface silver. Shadows stretch across it in long, soft shapes. Animal prints appear darker beneath the glow. Human tracks look like quiet reminders that someone passed here, even if that someone is now far down the trail. If you pause and look behind you, the pattern of your own journey feels strangely poetic. Wind occasionally drifts loose flakes into prints, softening their edges. This creates the impression that the footsteps are slowly fading. It is not sad. It is gentle. It is the natural way snow edits the past. Softly, without urgency. People love to say that snow is beautiful because it transforms the world. But the deeper beauty is that it also remembers the world. Not forever, but long enough for someone else to come along and understand that life moved here, that something walked, that something paused, that something passed through the woods with intention or curiosity or simple hunger. Snow keeps the shape of the journey, not the details. It remembers where you stepped, not why. It holds the imprint, not the meaning. And somehow that feels fitting, because most of the time the forest does not need the full story. It only needs the quiet assurance that something shared the land for a moment. Mount Shasta in winter feels like a place where time slows down enough for the earth to breathe deeply. Every footstep becomes part of that breath. Every track becomes part of the mountain's temporary memory. When the snow melts in spring, all of these memories wash away. But during winter, they stay. Soft, clear, patient. Snow does not tell stories. It simply keeps them safe until the sun decides to turn the page. When night settles over Mount Shasta and the last traces of daylight pull themselves gently behind the western horizon, the mountain begins to feel less like a shape of stone and more like a presence. The kind of presence that listens. The kind that watches without comment. The kind that has stood in the same place for so long that time itself seems to move differently around it. If mountains could keep diaries, Shasta would have filled entire libraries by now, each page written in snow, ash, wind, and silence. Long before explorers marked it on their maps, long before roads carved their way through forests, the first people to walk beneath its slopes already felt this presence. The tribes who lived here spoke of the mountain not as an obstacle or a landmark, but as something woven into their daily existence. They observed the shape of its ridges, the way clouds gathered around its peak, the way the snow line shifted with the seasons. To them, the mountain was a memory keeper, not because it whispered secrets, but because it stood quietly while generations passed beneath it. They hunted along the lower slopes. They watched the migration of animals. They noticed where water flowed in spring and where the earth cracked in summer heat. Their stories were built from these observations. Stories shaped by respect for patterns in nature. Stories told beside fires on cold nights. These early accounts were not dramatic. They were lessons in survival, mixed with gentle reminders that the world is older than any single person walking through it. Centuries later, explorers arrived. They came with notebooks, compasses, boots that were not ready for volcanic terrain, and an impressive confidence that mountains are simple objects waiting to be measured. Explorers love measuring things. Height, distance, slopes, angles, how many hours it takes to get from one ridge to another. But Mount Shasta did not change its character for them. It did not become easier to climb simply because someone brought a map. It continued doing what it always does, standing still and letting people figure themselves out. Many of these early explorers wrote in their journals about the sheer size of the mountain. They described the snowfields as endless. They complained about unpredictable weather. They praised the views that made their hands shake with excitement. Some wrote dramatically about the climb. Others wrote honestly about getting lost. If the mountain could read their journals, it would probably chuckle softly and say, "Yes, that sounds about right." Mountains tend to have a sense of humor that does not require laughter. Then came the settlers and migrants, people seeking new beginnings, people with wagons full of hopes and supplies that always seemed to run out at the wrong time. They looked at Mount Shasta with a different kind of awe, not the scientific awe of explorers, but the practical awe of people who realized they were standing next to a giant piece of earth that could either guide them or exhaust them, depending on which side they approached. These settlers left traces on the land, campsites, footpaths, old cabin foundations, stories passed among families, Some of the stories were adventurous, others practical. A few were slightly exaggerated because humans have never been able to resist embellishing a good tale. But whether exaggerated or not, the mountain absorbed them all with quiet patience. It did not complain about the extra drama. It simply let the stories settle like snowflakes. Years passed, then decades. Eventually, scientific curiosity replaced the age of exploration. Geologists arrived with tools that looked more complicated than necessary. They carried notebooks full of volcanic diagrams. They pointed confidently at layers of rock, then argued gently with each other about the age of different formations. Geologists love arguing in polite tones. It is one of their finest traditions. They examined lava tubes and ash deposits. They measured the slope angles. They studied how glaciers slowly carved the ridges. They mapped the fault lines and explained how the mountain built itself through eruptions that occurred long before humans existed. They described Shasta not as a mystery, but as a geological autobiography, a long text written in basalt and ice. If the mountain had feelings, it might be flattered that people took so much time to understand its childhood. Most of us cannot remember what we did last week. Shasta remembers what it was doing 12,000 years ago. And researchers are still trying to interpret the handwriting. What is remarkable is how all these perspectives now coexist gently around the mountain. The stories of early tribes, the journals of explorers, the quiet memories of settlers, the calculations of geologists. None of these interpretations replace the others. None erase the rest. They simply settle together like layers of snow. Different textures, different temperatures, same slope. Visitors walking the trails today often talk about the mountain as though it holds every story it has ever witnessed. They look at the ridges and think about the tribes. They look at the old climbing routes and imagine the explorers. They look at abandoned foundations and imagine the settlers cooking simple meals beside the fire. Then they look at the unusual shapes of the rock and think about scientists taking measurements with that familiar expression scientists get when they are excited but trying to stay professional. The mountain allows all these interpretations to coexist because it does not argue. It does not defend one version. It simply stands. Quiet, immense, patient. A silent archive of everything that has ever happened within its shadow. Some people describe this as the mountain remembering, not in a mystical sense, not in a human sense, more in the way landscapes naturally hold the marks of time. A fallen tree that grew from a seed dropped 2 centuries ago. A trail carved by boots that walked here long before highways existed. A rock split by frost 10 winters ago. A meadow shaped by fire, followed by renewal. These are all memories, not written in ink, written in form. Mount Shasta is a library without shelves. Every ridge is a chapter, every valley is a paragraph, every fallen branch is a sentence. The snow is a temporary page that gets rewritten with each storm. And the wind is a gentle editor, moving things around without asking permission. People who spend time on the mountain often feel something that is difficult to explain, a sense that the landscape has seen more than they ever will, a sense that their footsteps are joining countless footsteps before them, a sense that being on the mountain makes their own life feel simultaneously small and meaningful. Small because the mountain is enormous, meaningful because being part of something ancient always carries a quiet grace. There is a slightly humorous truth about mountains. They do not remember our names. They do not remember what brand of boots we wore. They do not care about our schedules. But they remember the shape of the world that existed long before us. They carry that memory not with intention, but simply because they cannot help it. A mountain cannot forget its history any more than a river can forget its source. The memory lies in its structure, in the layers built by time, in the creases shaped by weather, in the quiet endurance of stone that has never needed to hurry. Visitors sometimes ask each other what the mountain represents. Some say strength, others say endurance, others say peace. The funny thing is that the mountain does not represent anything. It simply exists. Humans are the ones who assign meaning, and that is fine. Humans have always taken comfort in naming the emotions that landscapes evoke. But beneath all the interpretation, one truth remains. The mountain holds every era gently, every culture that walked beneath it, every expedition that climbed its slopes, every scientific theory drawn on paper, every personal moment someone experienced while sitting quietly on a rock and watching the sun sink behind the peak. The mountain does not sort these memories. It does not categorize them. It holds them the same way snow holds footsteps, softly, without preference. Like all long-standing things, Mount Shasta teaches without trying. It reminds anyone who spends time near it that memory is not always a single story. Sometimes memory is a collection of countless small events held together by patience. Sometimes memory is carried by land instead of people. Sometimes memory is not something you search for. It is something you feel beneath your feet. And when the night deepens, when the forest softens, when the sky becomes a vast, dark field of quiet stars, the mountain feels especially ancient. Not old in a fragile sense, old in a steady sense, old in a way that reassures rather than intimidates. If you stand at the base of Shasta during such a night, you may notice something subtle. The mountain feels calm, as if it has already lived 1,000 stories and is ready to hold 1,000 more, not because it chooses to remember, but because mountains cannot do anything else. Night on Mount Shasta has a softness that feels almost intentional. It begins slowly, with the last threads of daylight fading behind the ridgeline until the sky becomes a deep shade of blue that settles quietly over the trees. The air cools 1 degree at a time, the wind grows gentler, the shadows stretch and blur until they blend with the darkness. Eventually, the forest becomes so still that even small sounds seem careful not to disturb anything. The stars appear gradually, first a few distant sparks, then dozens, then hundreds. They seem brighter here, as though the mountain lifts you closer to them. The sky stretches wide and clear, like a vast blanket of quiet light. It has none of the urgency of city skies. No blinking signs, no passing headlights, just a clean black canvas filled with a slow drifting glow. The forest beneath it does not make grand movements. There is no dramatic shift in the air. Instead, everything relaxes. The trees become tall silhouettes. The branches soften into gentle shapes. The moss glows faintly in the moonlight. Even the ground seems to breathe slower, as if settling into its own kind of rest. When the night reaches its deepest point, the quiet becomes almost absolute. Not empty, not hollow, just complete. A quiet that feels thick enough to touch. It wraps around the mountain like a soft blanket, smoothing every sharp edge until the landscape becomes something rounder, calmer, almost dreamlike. If silence had a texture, this would be it. Cool, even, steady. The mountain stands very still during these hours. It always stands still, of course, but at night the stillness feels more intentional. as if the mountain is aware that the world is resting and has decided to rest along with it. Snow sits on the slopes like layers of soft cotton. Rocks cool gently beneath the sky. Shadows settle without drama. Everything holds its place. A passing breeze might move through the trees, slipping between branches with a sound so soft it barely rises above a whisper. The breeze does not stay long. It glides away with the same gentle patience, leaving only a faint shiver in the leaves. If the breeze had manners, it would probably apologize for showing up without knocking. This is the hour when the forest animals rest. Even the ones that usually prefer the dark seem to slow down. The deer settle in the underbrush. The fox curls into a neat circle, tail wrapped over its nose. The owl finds a perch high on a branch and closes its eyes halfway, as if keeping watch in the most relaxed way possible. Even the bear settles its weight on the forest floor and lets out a long breath that sounds like a relieved sigh after a long day of being large. If you are standing on the path at this hour, you may feel a sense of belonging. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that does not require permission, the kind that appears when the world around you is calm enough to make your own heartbeat feel in rhythm with the wind. There is no rush here, no pressure, no noise demanding your attention. The mountain lets you just be, which might be the rarest gift of all. The snow reflects the moonlight with a soft glow that lights the ground in pale silver. Your shadow stretches long and slow across the surface. It looks peaceful, as though even your silhouette has decided to relax tonight. When you lift your hand, the shadow follows with no hurry, moving like it is drifting through water rather than air. This is the perfect moment to look back at the beginning of the journey, at the first image from the start of the story, at the mountain standing quietly in the early light, at the gentle rhythm of day settling over its slopes, at the calmness that always seemed to wait for you in the background. The mountain has this way of making every moment feel part of a circle. Morning leads to night. Night leads to morning. The cycle continues without rushing, without forcing, without breaking from its natural pace. The circle closes itself now. You stand here in the deep night. The mountain stands with you. The same presence, the same silence, the same patient calm. Nothing is different and everything is different at once. The light has changed. The air has cooled. The forest has quieted. But the feeling that the mountain has been gently watching since the beginning stays the same. It is the anchor of this place, a steady shape that does not need to speak to be understood. If the mountain could sleep, this is what it would look like. Not unconscious, not unaware, simply resting in its own immense stillness, holding the night quietly, holding the cold air, holding the silence as if it were something precious. Some people say they feel watched when they stand near Mount Shasta at night. Not in a frightening way, in a comforting way, like someone is making sure they do not accidentally wander off into the wrong direction, as if the mountain is keeping an eye on things simply because it has been here longer than anything else. You might glance up at the peak and feel a strange sense of reassurance, the same reassurance you get from a street light left, glowing for you, or a blanket pulled up gently over your shoulders. The mountain is not actually guarding you, of course. Mountains are busy doing mountain things, which mostly involve not moving and occasionally shaking snow off a cliff. But the feeling is real. A quiet sense that you are not alone in the dark, that the landscape around you holds you gently, even without arms, that the silence is not empty but shared. As the night deepens further, even the smallest noises soften. A twig that snaps sounds muffled by snow. A distant owl call fades quickly into the trees. The whisper of a breeze loses itself before it reaches your ears. The world narrows to small sensations. The cold on your fingertips. The light pressure of your breath against the air. The slow rise and fall of your chest. Everything becomes simple. Everything becomes enough. Sleep often comes easy in a place like this. Not because the body is tired, but because the world gives you permission to let go. The mountain feels like a presence that never rushes you. It stands calm, quiet, steady, and that steadiness settles into you like warm tea. If you close your eyes, the sounds of the forest fade into a soft blur. You can still sense the mountain nearby, not in detail, but in impression. A large, quiet shape, a steady weight in the landscape, a calm outline drawn against the night sky. You almost feel it, breathing with the wind. Imagine for a moment that the mountain keeps watch over the forest, the way a lighthouse keeps watch over the sea. Not with beams of light, not with intention, simply by being there, by existing with such presence that everything around it feels safer, softer, more at ease. If mountains could tuck someone into bed, Shasta would probably be excellent at it. The stars continue their slow drift across the sky. The moon shifts position with quiet patience. The night moves forward with no announcement. Time feels thick, smooth, comfortable. You can almost sense the world beneath you settling further into sleep. The air cools 1 degree more. The smell of pine settles lower to the ground. The snow grows brighter under the moonlight. The mountain becomes a darker shape against the sky. The line between earth and sky softens. Everything feels closer. Everything feels slower. And then finally, there is a moment when the world feels completely still. Not frozen, not silent, just resting. In that moment, the mountain feels like a companion sitting beside you, not speaking, not moving, just keeping you company. You can fall asleep now. Nothing is rushing you. Nothing needs to be decided. Nothing needs to be understood. The night holds you softly. The mountain stands quietly. The world breathes evenly. You are safe here. You are warm. You are drifting. Good night. Sleep gently. The mountain will stay where it is, keeping watch in the quiet until the morning finds you again.